When a billionaire CEO is forced to sign away her empire at gunpoint, the only person who can save her is the janitor she's never noticed, because he speaks the one language her kidnapper doesn't understand. Welcome back to another gripping story. What you're about to hear is a tale of hidden strength, overlooked heroes, and the power of silence in the face of terror. Before we dive in, please hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's begin where power meets desperation, and where the invisible become unforgettable. The Whitmore Grand Hotel didn't just exist in the heart of the city. It dominated the skyline like a declaration of wealth, its glass and steel architecture catching sunlight and throwing it back in brilliant, arrogant flashes. Inside, the lobby stretched vast and gleaming, all polished marble floors, towering columns wrapped in gold leaf, and chandeliers that cost more than most people's houses. The air itself seemed expensive, perfumed with imported flowers and the subtle scent of old money. Vivian Whitlock moved through this kingdom of luxury like she owned it, because she did. At 42, she'd built the Whitmore Grand from a struggling mid-tier property into the most prestigious hotel chain on the East Coast. 5 properties in total, each one a monument to her vision and ruthless business acumen. Her heels clicked against the marble with the confidence of someone who'd never had to ask permission for anything in her professional life. She wore power like other women wore perfume. A tailored charcoal suit that cost $4,000, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek chignon that revealed diamond earrings worth considerably more. Her assistant struggled to keep pace 3 steps behind, tablet in hand, rattling off the afternoon schedule. The Singapore investors arrive at 2, the contractor estimates are on your desk, and legal wants 15 minutes before the board meeting at 4. Tell legal they get 10, Vivian said without breaking stride, and move the Singapore meeting to the Constellation Room. The Empire Suite makes them nervous. Too much glass. Yes, Ms. Whitlock. Vivian's gaze swept the lobby with the critical eye of someone who noticed everything. A smudge on a window, a bellhop's poorly knotted tie, a guest service agent who smiled too mechanically. Excellence wasn't a goal at the Whitmore Grand. It was the minimum acceptable standard. Her attention caught on a janitor near the concierge desk, pushing a mop bucket in slow, methodical circles. Dark-skinned, maybe mid-30s, wearing the hotel's maintenance uniform that somehow managed to make everyone who wore it invisible. She'd seen him before, or rather, she'd seen past him, the way you see past furniture or wallpaper. He was part of the background machinery that kept her hotel running, as unremarkable as the marble he cleaned. She looked away without a second thought. The morning continued in its usual rhythm of controlled chaos. Phone calls that moved millions, decisions that affected hundreds of employees, negotiations that required the kind of steel-spined composure that had made Vivian's reputation legendary. By 11 o'clock, she'd fired a vendor, approved a 7-figure renovation, and verbally eviscerated a competitor who'd tried to poach her head chef. She was in her element, which is perhaps why she didn't notice the man in the expensive suit watching her from across the lobby. Didn't register how his gaze followed her movements with the focus of someone studying prey. Didn't see how he timed his approach to coincide with her path toward the elevators, when her assistant had peeled off toward the business center and the morning crowds had thinned. Vivian reached for her phone, already mentally 3 steps ahead in her schedule, when she felt the presence behind her, too close, invading the bubble of personal space that powerful people learn to enforce without thinking. She started to turn, irritation flashing across her features. Then she felt it. Something hard and cold pressing into the small of her back, hidden by the man's body, invisible to anyone watching. Don't turn around. The voice came low and calm, almost friendly, the kind of tone a person might use to discuss the weather. Don't scream. Don't do anything except smile and keep walking. Vivian's breath caught. Her mind, trained by years of high-stakes negotiations, immediately began calculating angles, options, escape routes. But the pressure against her spine increased just slightly, a reminder of exactly how little leverage she had. I said smile, Ms. Whitlock. The voice took on an edge. You're very good at smiling for cameras. Do it now. She did. The expression felt like glass on her face, brittle and unnatural, but she forced her lips to curve upward. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but 30 years of boardrooms had taught her how to hide panic behind a mask of composure. That's better. A hand appeared at her elbow, a stranger's hand, guiding her with the casual intimacy of an old friend. To anyone watching, they might have looked like business associates discussing a deal. We're going to walk to the elevator. You're going to press the button for the executive floor, and you're going to do it like nothing in the world is wrong. Who are you? Vivian's voice came out steady, which she counted as a small victory. What do you want? My name is Grant Hale, and what I want is very simple. They were moving now, crossing the lobby at an unhurried pace. Grant's hand stayed at her elbow, the weapon pressed against her back, hidden by the drape of his suit jacket. I want you to sign some papers, just a few signatures, and this all goes away. Easy. Signatures. Vivian's mind raced. Corporate documents. You want what? Stock transfers? Property deeds? Smart and beautiful. Your reputation doesn't lie. Grant's tone carried a note of admiration that made her skin crawl. But let's save the details for somewhere more private. Right now, just focus on walking and breathing. You'd be surprised how many people forget to breathe. They reached the elevator bank. Vivian's finger trembled, the first visible crack in her composure, as she reached for the call button. The polished brass reflected her face back at her, pale, controlled, terrified beneath the surface. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. A young couple stepped out, laughing about something, oblivious. Grant guided Vivian inside, his body angling to keep the weapon concealed. As the doors slid shut, sealing them in the mirrored enclosure, Vivian caught her own gaze in the reflection. For the first time in her professional life, she had no control, no leverage, no power, and no one in the entire building had any idea she needed help. Marcus Reed had been invisible for so long that he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Not literally invisible, of course. People noticed him the way they noticed a fire extinguisher or an exit sign. Functionally present, utterly unremarkable, part of the infrastructure rather than part of the human landscape. After 3 years working maintenance at the Whitmore Grand, Marcus had become an expert at occupying space without commanding attention, which suited him fine. Attention wasn't what he needed. What he needed was steady employment with health insurance, predictable hours, and a paycheck that arrived every 2 weeks without fail. What he needed was stability for Nora. His daughter's face flashed through his mind as he pushed the mop bucket toward the concierge desk. 7 years old, gap-toothed smile, eyes that saw everything even though her ears heard nothing. Nora had been born deaf, and in the 3 years since her mother's death, she'd become Marcus's entire world. Learning ASL had been non-negotiable, as essential as learning to breathe. Now his hands spoke her language as fluently as his voice spoke English, and he found himself thinking in signs as often as words. The morning shift at the Whitmore Grand started at 6, which meant Marcus left Nora with Mrs. Chen next door at 5:30, a routine so established it barely registered anymore. By 7, he'd cleaned the third-floor conference rooms. By 8, he'd restocked the second-floor bathrooms. And by 9:30, he was working the lobby, the most public and simultaneously most isolating part of his day. He mopped in slow, steady strokes, listening without appearing to listen, watching without seeming to watch. Years in the military had taught him situational awareness, the kind that looked like coincidence but was actually constant, low-grade vigilance. Old habits died hard, even when the most dangerous thing you faced was a spilled latte. Marcus saw the CEO coming before she did, Ms. Whitlock, a woman whose path he'd carefully avoided for 3 years. Not out of fear exactly, but out of a bone-deep understanding that people like her didn't see people like him unless something had gone wrong. She moved through the lobby like she was parting water, and everyone instinctively made space. He redirected his mop bucket slightly, giving her path more clearance. Their worlds weren't meant to intersect. But then something changed. Marcus couldn't have said what caught his attention. Maybe the way she hesitated mid-stride, or the subtle shift in her posture, or the fact that the man who'd fallen in to step beside her kept his hand at her elbow just a fraction too firmly. Whatever it was, something pinged in the part of Marcus's brain that had kept him alive through 2 tours overseas, the part that recognized threat the way other people recognized faces. He kept mopping, kept his head down, but his attention sharpened. The man was well-dressed, expensive suit, the kind of polished appearance that belonged in a place like the Whitmore Grand. But there was something off in the body language, too controlled, too precise. And Ms. Whitlock's smile looked wrong, stretched too tight across her face like a mask that didn't quite fit. Marcus watched their reflection in the polished marble floor, using the surface like a mirror. The man's hand never left her elbow. Ms. Whitlock's shoulders were rigid, her spine too straight. They moved toward the elevators, and Marcus noticed something else. The way the man angled his body, keeping something hidden between them. A weapon. Had to be. Nothing else explained that specific positioning. Marcus's pulse kicked up, but his hand stayed steady on the mop. Years of training had taught him that panic was just noise, and noise got you killed. What mattered was assessment, options, action. He couldn't intervene directly. If the man was armed, any confrontation risked Ms. Whitlock's life and probably the lives of everyone in the lobby. He couldn't shout a warning for the same reason. And he had no authority here, no credentials, nothing that would make security listen to a janitor's gut feeling about body language. For a few seconds, Marcus genuinely didn't know what to do. He was invisible, powerless, watching a crime unfold in real time with no clear way to stop it. Then Ms. Whitlock did something that changed everything. As they walked, her right hand moved at her side, not dramatically, not obviously, but in small, deliberate gestures. Her fingers formed shapes that Marcus recognized instantly, the muscle memory of 3 years signing with Nora kicking in before conscious thought. She was signing help. Her hand formed the sign clearly, then moved to another. Weapon. Then another. Forced. And finally, with her fingers trembling slightly, contract. The final sign was the one that made Marcus's blood run cold. Don't look up. She wasn't signing to him specifically. She couldn't have known he understood ASL. She was signing into empty space, a desperate message cast like a bottle into the ocean, hoping against hope that someone, somewhere, might understand. And Marcus did. His mind kicked into operational mode, the part of him that had run tactical responses in Kandahar coming back online after years of dormancy. He had maybe 90 seconds before they reached the elevator. 90 seconds to do something without escalating the situation into a hostage crisis, or worse. Marcus adjusted his mop bucket, deliberately positioning it so the yellow caution sign faced the elevator bank. A small obstacle, unremarkable to anyone except the janitor who'd placed it there. Then he pulled out his phone, the cheap prepaid model he carried for emergencies, and opened the text function. His supervisor's number was first. He typed fast. Security needed. Lobby. Woman forced. Armed man. Elevator. Now. Send. Then he opened a new message to the hotel's main security line, a number every employee had memorized during orientation. Check lobby cameras. CEO in danger. Elevator bank. Weapon. Forced. Send. Marcus looked up, careful to keep his gaze unfocused, aimed at nothing in particular. Ms. Whitlock and the man were at the elevator now. The doors opened. They stepped inside. And just before the doors closed, Ms. Whitlock's hand moved one more time, so quickly Marcus almost missed it. Thank you. She'd seen him. Or rather, she'd seen someone capable of reading her signs, which in this moment was the same thing. The elevator doors shut. Marcus abandoned the mop bucket and headed for the service corridor, moving fast now, the invisibility of his position working in his favor. Nobody questioned a maintenance worker moving with purpose. They just assumed he was fixing something. He took the stairs 2 at a time, heading up while simultaneously calculating timelines. The man had forced Ms. Whitlock toward the executive floor. That was where her office was, where she'd have access to corporate documents, signatures, whatever this contract was about. By the time Marcus reached the 3rd floor landing, his phone was buzzing. His supervisor. What the hell are you talking about? Marcus called instead of texting, knowing he had seconds to make this credible. James, listen to me. Check the lobby footage from 2 minutes ago. Watch the CEO and the man in the gray suit. Watch their body language. He has a weapon on her. Marcus, if this is some kind of, I'm a combat veteran. I know what a coerced hostage looks like. Check the footage. Now. He hung up before James could argue, then kept climbing. 4th floor, 5th floor. His lungs burned. He was in decent shape, But 3 flights of stairs at a sprint was different than a morning jog. He could hear movement in the stairwell above him, echoing down from the executive level. 6th floor. The executive level door was locked, requiring keycard access he didn't have. Marcus pressed his back against the wall, breathing hard, listening. On the other side of the door, he could hear muffled voices, a man's low murmur, a woman's sharp response. His phone buzzed again. This time it was an unknown number, but he answered anyway. "This is Tessa Ward, head of security." The voice was clipped, professional, carrying the authority of someone used to crisis management. "I've reviewed the footage. You're right. We have a situation." "Where are you?" "6th floor stairwell. They're on the other side of the door, heading toward the executive offices." "Do not engage. We're mobilizing police response now. ETA 4 minutes." "He'll have what he needs in 4 minutes," Marcus said. "Whatever contract he's forcing her to sign, I understand the timeline. But if you try to play hero and he's armed, people die. Stay in the stairwell. That's an order." Tessa hung up. Marcus stared at his phone, jaw clenched. 4 minutes. In 4 minutes, a man with a weapon could force a signature, could steal a company, could disappear into the infrastructure of corporate fraud that would take months to untangle. In 4 minutes, Ms. Whitlock could lose everything. Or in 4 minutes, something worse could happen. The man could decide a witness was too dangerous, could tie up loose ends, could... Marcus pushed the thought away. He wasn't going to let fear make his decisions. But Tessa was right about one thing. Charging through the door unarmed against someone with a weapon was suicide, and suicide didn't help anyone. But there were other ways to intervene, other ways to buy time. Marcus pulled up the hotel's internal messaging system on his phone, the one every employee had access to for shift coordination. He scrolled through the contact list until he found what he needed. The executive floor administrator, a woman named Patricia who'd worked at the Whitmore for 20 years. Patricia. Emergency. CEO in danger. Man with weapon-forcing signatures. Need you to slow everything down, drop something, call her office, create interruptions. Police coming, 4 minutes. He sent it, knowing it sounded insane, knowing Patricia might think he was having a breakdown. But he also knew that people who'd worked somewhere for 20 years developed instincts about when something was genuinely wrong. The phone buzzed 30 seconds later. Patricia. On it. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, sending a silent thought toward Nora, a promise that he'd come home, that he wouldn't do anything stupid, that she wouldn't lose another parent. Then he settled in to wait, listening through the door, ready to move if movement became necessary. On the other side of the steel barrier, he could hear voices rising, Miss Whitlock's sharp with anger, the man's low and insistent. Then another voice joined them, higher-pitched, apologetic. Patricia, creating the interruption Marcus had asked for. Time stretched. Marcus counted seconds in his head, a meditative practice from his military days. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. 3. Somewhere in the building, police were moving into position. Security was coordinating responses. And in the stairwell, a janitor nobody had ever noticed was waiting to be needed. 4 minutes felt like forever. Vivian's hands were shaking, and she couldn't make them stop. Grant had positioned her at the conference table in the glass-walled room adjacent to her office, the one she used for sensitive negotiations, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while simultaneously making her feel dangerously exposed. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd chosen this room for transparency, for the psychological advantage of sunlight and open space. Now it felt like a cage made of windows. The contract sat on the table between them, 30 pages of legal text that Grant had somehow produced from a leather briefcase he'd been carrying. She recognized the format: corporate transfer documents, stock reassignments, board authorizations. Someone had spent serious time preparing this. Someone with access to proprietary information about the Whitmore Grand's corporate structure. "Read it if you like," Grant said, settling into the chair across from her with the relaxed posture of a man at a business lunch. The weapon, a matte black semi-automatic that looked military grade, sat on the table next to his right hand, casual as a coffee cup. "I've got time." Vivian forced herself to focus on the text, though the words blurred and swam. The shaking in her hands had spread to her entire body, a fine tremor she couldn't control. She'd built an empire on the ability to project confidence even when she felt none. But terror was different. Terror was a physical thing, turning her muscles to water. This transfers controlling interest to a shell corporation, she said, proud that her voice came out almost steady. Cascade Holdings, LLC. That's you? That's me. Grant smiled. Well, technically it's a consortium of investors I represent. But yes, for legal purposes, I'm the face of Cascade Holdings. And in exchange, I get... Vivian scanned the compensation clause, her lawyer's brain trying to process through the fog of adrenaline. $10 million. Very generous, considering the alternative is a bullet and your entire legacy destroyed in the scandal that follows. Grant's tone stayed conversational, even friendly. Think of it as retirement. You walk away wealthy, alive, and with your reputation intact. I think that's more than fair. Fair? Vivian heard her own laugh, sharp and bitter. You're holding me at gunpoint and you want to discuss fairness? I want to discuss reality. Grant leaned forward slightly. The reality is that I have leverage and you don't. The reality is that your personal security is having coffee downstairs. The reality is that no one knows you're in danger, and by the time they figure it out, if they figure it out, this will be over. You'll have signed, I'll have left, and the legal transfer will be complete. Fighting me doesn't change the outcome. It just determines whether you survive it. Vivian stared at him, trying to reconcile the pleasant, reasonable tone with the weapon on the table. Grant looked like someone who should be discussing golf handicaps or investment portfolios, not threatening murder. But his eyes, cold, assessing, utterly devoid of empathy, told the truth his voice tried to hide. How did you get into my building? The question came out before she could stop it. Security protocols are excellent, Grant agreed. But protocols are only as good as the people implementing them. And people can be bought. Schedules can be shared, access codes can be leaked. Really, Vivian, you should be more careful about who you trust. The implication hit like a fist to the gut. Someone inside, someone on her staff, someone with high-level access had sold her out. The betrayal stung almost as much as the gun. Vivian turned back to the contract, flipping pages slowly, buying time while her mind raced through options. She could sign, survive the immediate threat, and deal with the legal fallout later. But Grant was right. Once her signature was on these documents, the transfer would be legitimate enough to create months of court battles. And there was no guarantee he'd let her live anyway. Dead witnesses didn't file lawsuits. She could refuse, force him to shoot her, and hope the sound brought help. But the conference room was soundproofed, designed specifically to prevent eavesdropping. A gunshot might be muffled enough to go unnoticed or to be dismissed as something else. And even if help came, she'd still be dead. Or she could stall. Keep reading, ask questions, create delays and hope. Hope for what? That someone had noticed? That the janitor who'd seen her signing had somehow understood and raised an alarm? The thought felt desperate, pathetic even. But it was all she had. I need to read the full document, Vivian said, straightening in her chair and forcing steel into her voice. If I'm signing away my company, I'm doing it with full knowledge of the terms. Grant's expression flickered with irritation. You're stalling. I'm being thorough. You want a legal signature? It needs to be informed consent. Otherwise, any lawyer could tear this apart in court. She met his gaze directly, channeling every ounce of boardroom authority she'd ever wielded. You've clearly gone to considerable trouble to make this look legitimate. Don't undermine your own work by rushing me. For a long moment, Grant just looked at her. Then slowly, he smiled. A real smile this time, carrying genuine amusement. You know what? I like you, Vivian. You've got spine. He gestured toward the document. Fine. Read. Take your time. But understand that your time means the next 15 minutes. After that, I stop being patient. 15 minutes. Vivian turned back to the contract, her eyes scanning text she barely processed while her mind counted seconds. 15 minutes for someone to notice. 15 minutes for the message she'd signed into empty space to somehow, impossibly, reach someone who understood. 15 minutes to save her life. She read slowly, deliberately, mouthing words silently to stretch each second. Her hand stayed in her lap, hidden beneath the table's edge, and while her eyes tracked legal terminology above, her fingers moved below. Signing to no one. Signing to everyone. signing the same message over and over like a prayer to gods she didn't believe in. Help, now, please. Durad. Tessa Ward had been in security for 23 years, and she'd learned to trust her gut over her eyes. What her eyes showed her was lobby footage of the CEO and a well-dressed businessman walking toward the elevator. Ordinary, unremarkable. The kind of thing that happened 50 times a day. What her gut told her, backed by the frantic call from a janitor she barely knew, was that something was catastrophically wrong. She'd watched the footage 3 times now, and each viewing made the wrongness more apparent. Ms. Whitlock's body language was off, too rigid, too controlled. The man's hand at her elbow looked helpful from one angle, controlling from another. And there, just before the elevator doors closed, a flicker of movement from Ms. Whitlock's hand. Tessa enhanced the image, zooming in frame by frame. The movement was deliberate but small, fingers forming shapes that looked almost like ASL, said Marcus Reed's voice on the phone when she called him back. American Sign Language. She was signing help, weapon, and forced contract. You're sure? My daughter is deaf. I've been signing for 3 years. I'm sure. Tessa made the decision in the 2 seconds it took her to process that information. She opened 3 lines simultaneously: building security, local police, and the hotel's crisis management team. Her voice stayed calm, projecting the kind of controlled authority that prevented panic. This is Tessa Ward, head of security at the Whitmore Grand. We have a hostage situation in progress. CEO Vivian Whitlock being held at gunpoint by unidentified male suspect. Last seen heading to executive floor. Armed and dangerous. I'm requesting immediate police response and SWAT standby. The dispatcher's voice came back crisp and professional. Can you confirm visual on the weapon? Negative visual, but we have reliable intelligence from a witness on site. Suspect is coercing CEO toward forced document signing. This is corporate kidnapping with intent. Units are rolling. ETA 4 minutes. Can you evacuate the floor? Tessa pulled up the executive floor layout on her computer, mentally mapping personnel and risk zones. Negative. Evacuation could trigger the suspect. We have 1 civilian in the stairwell, the witness who called it in. I need him to hold position. Everyone else on that floor needs to shelter in place until your people arrive. She switched to the internal security channel. All units code black on executive level. Soft lockdown. No alarms. No announcements. I want eyes on every exit point and elevators frozen below 6th floor. Nobody goes up, nobody comes down until PD clears it. The responses came back in rapid succession, her team falling into the crisis protocol they'd trained for but never expected to use. Tessa pulled up the executive floor cameras, scanning for any view of the glass-walled conference room. There. She could just see movement through the translucent walls. 2 figures at the table, 1 seated, 1 standing. As she watched, a 3rd figure appeared in the frame, partially obscuring the view. Tessa grabbed her radio. Who just entered the executive conference room? That's Patricia Chen, executive floor administrator, came the response from one of her monitoring team. She's been up there for 20 years. Get me her direct line. Now. 30 seconds later, Tessa had Patricia on the phone. The older woman's voice was tight with stress. I got a message from Marcus in maintenance. He said Ms. Whitlock was in danger, that I should create interruptions, so I brought her the quarterly report she'd asked for this morning, except what? Tessa kept her own voice calm, steadying. There's a man in there with her. I didn't recognize him. And Ms. Whitlock looked... Patricia's voice dropped to a whisper. She looked terrified. Her hands were shaking. In 20 years, I've never seen her scared of anything. Did you see a weapon? No, but he was sitting in a way that blocked my view of the table. And when I came in, he got very still, very focused, like I'd interrupted something important. Patricia, I need you to listen carefully. Tessa pulled up the executive floor evacuation routes. Police are on their way, but in the meantime, I need you to do exactly what Marcus suggested. Create interruptions. Can you think of reasons to go back into that room? I could say there's a call holding for Ms. Whitlock, or that her 2 o'clock appointment is early, or perfect. Spread those interruptions out. Every 2 or 3 minutes, something that requires her attention. Make the man think this floor is busy, that people are coming and going. Can you do that? Yes. Patricia's voice steadied. Yes, I can do that. And Patricia, If you see the weapon, if he makes any threatening moves, you get out immediately and you run. Your life is not worth the interruption. Understood? Understood. Tessa hung up and turned back to her monitors. 3 minutes until police arrived. 3 minutes during which anything could happen. The man could force the signature, could decide he didn't need Ms. Whitlock alive, could panic and start shooting. 3 minutes felt like staring into an abyss. Her radio crackled. Ward, this is Officer Chen at the north entrance. We're staging in the parking structure. SWAT is 2 minutes out. What's the situation? Tessa gave them the rundown, suspect location, hostage status, floor layout, the works. The police lieutenant on the other end listened without interrupting, then asked the question Tessa had been dreading. Do we know the suspect's identity or motive? Negative on identity. Motive appears to be corporate theft, forcing CEO to sign transfer documents at gunpoint. We're dealing with someone sophisticated enough to forge high-level legal papers and infiltrate a secure building. So he's got resources and planning. That makes him dangerous. So the lieutenant paused. Can you get me eyes inside that conference room? Tessa zoomed in on the camera feed. The glass walls were translucent, designed for privacy while maintaining the illusion of transparency. She could see shapes, movement, but not details. Negative on close visual. The room is designed to obscure sightlines. Then we go in blind. Not completely. Tessa switched to the building schematic. There's a maintenance access point in the ceiling, part of the HVAC system, runs right over the conference room. If I can get someone small enough up there. Absolutely not. The lieutenant's voice went hard. We don't send civilians into active hostage situations. What if the civilian is ex-military, combat veteran who's already in position and knows the building layout? Silence on the radio. Then, the janitor? Marcus Reed, 2 tours in Afghanistan, security clearance, and he's already on the 6th floor. He saw the initial approach. He's the one who called it in. He knows what he's doing. More silence. Tessa could practically hear the lieutenant weighing liability against tactical advantage. Put him on. Tessa switched to her phone, calling Marcus's number. He answered on the first ring. Talk to me. I've got the police lieutenant on the line. He wants to ask you some questions about your military background. She patched the call through, then listened as Marcus gave his service record in the clipped, efficient manner of someone who'd reported to superior officers. Rank, unit, combat deployments, specialty training. It took less than a minute. The lieutenant came back on. Reed, I'm not going to order you to do anything. You're a civilian, but if you're willing to voluntarily assist, we could use eyes in that room before we breach. What do you need? Marcus's voice was steady. Can you access the maintenance crawl space above the conference room without being seen or heard? Yes. Can you get visual confirmation of the suspect's weapon and positioning? Yes. And can you do it in the next 90 seconds? A pause. Then, yes. Then you're cleared to move. But Reed, the second you see anything that suggests imminent harm to the hostage, you get out. You are not authorized to engage. Understood? Understood. The line went quiet. Tessa switched back to the camera feeds, watching the hallway outside the executive suite. A maintenance access panel opened, so smoothly she almost missed it, and Marcus's dark-clad form slipped through. Then he was gone, disappeared into the infrastructure of the building like he'd never been there at all. Tessa checked her watch. Police were in position. SWAT was staging. Patricia was creating interruptions. And Marcus Reed, invisible, unremarkable Marcus Reed, was crawling through the ceiling above a man with a gun, about to become the most important person in the building. 1 minute until breach time. Tessa started counting seconds. The crawl space above the executive floor was exactly as Marcus remembered. Tight, dark, and filled with the mechanical hum of HVAC systems. He moved on his stomach, distributing his weight across the support beams to avoid any creaking that might carry through the ceiling tiles below. His phone was on silent in his pocket, the police lieutenant's voice still in his head. Get visual confirmation. Don't engage. Marcus had no intention of engaging. He had every intention of going home to Nora tonight, of making her favorite pasta dinner, of reading her the book about the girl who lived on a spaceship. Heroes died in movies. In real life, heroes were just people who got lucky enough to help without getting killed. but he also knew that sometimes luck required positioning. He crawled forward, following the blueprint he'd memorized during his first week of employment. The Whitmore Grand's maintenance systems were state-of-the-art, which meant everything was labeled, mapped, and accessible. The conference room was 15 feet ahead, marked by a different ceiling tile configuration. Translucent panels that let light through while obscuring vision from below. Marcus reached the edge of the conference room space and went still, listening. Voices filtered up through the panels, muffled but audible. "Don't see how this clause is enforceable." Ms. Whitlock's voice, tight with stress but still sharp, still fighting. "You don't need to see how. You just need to sign." The man, Grant, he'd called himself earlier. "We're at 14 minutes, Vivian. I'm getting impatient." Marcus shifted position slightly, angling to see through the gap where ceiling met wall. The translucent panels distorted vision, but he could make out shapes. 2 people at a table, one standing, one seated. And there, on the table surface, the dark shape of a weapon. He pulled out his phone, typing one-handed while bracing himself with the other. Visual confirmed, handgun on table, suspect standing, hostage seated. No immediate threat but suspect agitated. The response came back in seconds. Hold position, breach in 30 seconds. Marcus breathed slowly, counting down. 30 seconds, 29, 28. Below him, Grant's voice rose slightly. "I'm done waiting. Sign the document now, or I'm done being polite." "You want polite?" Ms. Whitlock's voice cracked, fear bleeding through. "You're pointing a gun at me and demanding—" "I'm demanding your signature. Last chance, Vivian." 20 seconds. Marcus heard movement, a chair scraping. Then Patricia's voice, bright and utterly incongruous. "Ms. Whitlock, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but your 2 o'clock appointment is here early, and they're quite insistent. Get out." Grant's voice went flat, dangerous. "I just need to know if you'd like me to—" "I said get out!" 15 seconds. The sound of a door closing. Then Grant again, harder now. "No more interruptions, no more delays. Sign, or I shoot you in the knee, and you sign anyway while you're bleeding. Your choice." 10 seconds. Marcus's hand moved to the ceiling tile directly above the conference room. One push and it would drop, would create a distraction, would— "Do not engage," the lieutenant had said. But the math was simple. If Grant shot Ms. Whitlock in the next 8 seconds, she could bleed out before anyone reached her. Knee wounds could sever arteries, could kill. Marcus's fingers curled around the edge of the tile. 5 seconds. Below, he heard the unmistakable sound of a hammer being cocked. Metal on metal, the mechanical click of a weapon being readied. "I'm counting to 3, Vivian." 3 seconds. Marcus made his decision. He pulled his phone back out, opened the text interface, and sent one word to Tessa Ward, "Now." Then he moved his hand to the tile and waited. 1. 2 seconds. 2. 1 second. 3. Marcus pushed. The ceiling tile dropped, hitting the conference room floor with a crash that shattered the tense silence like a gunshot. For one frozen instant, everyone in the room looked up. Grant, Ms. Whitlock, even Patricia, who'd been hovering outside the door. And in that instant, the lights went out. Not just the conference room lights. Every light on the executive floor killed simultaneously by Tessa Ward's hand on the electrical override system. The kind of darkness that only happened in modern buildings with no windows to the outside. Absolute and disorienting. Marcus heard movement below, scrambling, a shout, the sound of something metal hitting the floor. He dropped through the opening he'd created, landing in a crouch on the conference room floor, his eyes already adjusting to the darkness that everyone else was still blind in. Training took over. He moved toward where the weapon had been, his hands finding it before Grant could recover. The gun came up in his grip, familiar weight, muscle memory from 1,000 weapons drills. He didn't point it at Grant, didn't need to. Just holding it changed the power dynamic entirely. "Federal building! Everyone freeze!" Marcus's voice came out with the bark of command he hadn't used in years. It wasn't true, the Whitmore wasn't federal property, but in the darkness and chaos, it sounded official enough. Light flooded back in as emergency systems kicked on, dimmer than before, but enough to see. Marcus stood in the center of the room, weapons secured, positioned between Grant and Ms. Whitlock. Grant was on his knees, hands raised, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. and through the glass walls, Marcus could see tactical team members pouring onto the floor, weapons drawn, moving with the coordinated precision of professionals who'd done this 100 times. The conference room door burst open. "Police! Nobody move!" Marcus set the weapon down carefully, raised his hands, and stepped back. Suspect is unarmed. Hostage is safe. I'm a civilian who just secured the weapon. An officer moved forward, kicking the gun away and securing Grant with the kind of speed that came from training. Another officer was already with Ms. Whitlock, checking her for injuries, speaking in the calm, reassuring tones meant to de-escalate trauma. Tessa Ward appeared in the doorway, her expression caught between relief and fury. "Reed, I'm going to kill you. I explicitly said don't engage." Marcus met her gaze. The lights went out. "I secured a loose weapon in a dark room. I didn't engage anyone. The lights went out because I cut them. And I appreciated the assist." Tessa stared at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "We're going to have a long conversation about this." Looking forward to it. But Tessa's attention had already shifted to Ms. Whitlock, who was being helped to her feet by one of the officers. The CEO looked pale, shaken, her perfect composure completely shattered. She was crying, not dramatically, just quiet tears of relief and shock and adrenaline crash. Her gaze found Marcus across the room. For 3 years, she'd looked through him, past him, around him. Now she saw him, really saw him. "You..." Her voice broke. She tried again. "You understood. The signing. You..." "My daughter is deaf," Marcus said quietly. "I learned ASL for her. I just happened to be in the right place." Ms. Whitlock crossed the space between them, ignoring the police officers who tried to stop her, and did something Marcus never expected. She hugged him. It was awkward, brief, and completely genuine, the embrace of someone who'd looked into the abyss and been pulled back. When she stepped away, her mascara was running and her hands were still shaking. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me." Marcus didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to explain that he'd been invisible so long that seeing other invisible people had become second nature. So he just nodded. An officer was taking Grant away, reading rights in a professional monotone. Another was collecting the weapon, the documents, photographing everything. The conference room had transformed from a crime scene to a controlled investigation site. Tessa appeared at Marcus's elbow. "Police are going to need your statement. Probably going to take a few hours." Marcus checked his watch, 3:15. Nora got out of school at 3:30. "I need to make a call first." He stepped into the hallway, pulling out his phone. Mrs. Chen answered on the second ring. "Marcus, is everything okay?" "I'm fine, but I'm going to be late picking up Nora. Can she stay with you until maybe 6? Of course, of course. She's already here. We're making cookies. Take your time." Marcus closed his eyes, letting relief wash through him. "Thank you. I'll explain everything when I get there." When he turned back, Ms. Whitlock was watching him from the conference room doorway. She'd composed herself slightly, wiped away the tears, but the vulnerability was still there. "Your daughter," she said, "the one who's deaf. How old?" 7. "And you learned sign language for her." "Of course I did. She's my daughter." Ms. Whitlock's expression did something complicated, processing information that seemed to strike deeper than the words themselves. "What's her name?" "Nora." "Nora." Ms. Whitlock repeated it like she was committing it to memory. "Marcus, I've seen you working here for years and I never even knew your name. I never..." She stopped, swallowed. "I'm so sorry." Marcus could have said a lot of things. Could have pointed out that she was a CEO and he was a janitor, that invisibility was part of the job description, that he'd never expected or needed recognition. Instead, he said, "You know it now." Something shifted in Ms. Whitlock's face, determination replacing vulnerability. "Yes, I do." A police detective was approaching with a notepad, ready to take statements. The investigation was just beginning. Grant would be processed, the documents analyzed, the inside conspirator identified. It would take weeks, maybe months to untangle everything. But in this moment, in the damaged conference room on the 6th floor, two people who'd never been meant to see each other had crossed paths in a way that would change everything. Marcus just didn't know how much. Not yet. That realization would come later. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and institutional cleaning products, a combination that made Marcus's stomach turn after 4 hours of giving statements. He sat in a gray interview room across from Detective Sarah Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, she'd clarified immediately, who'd been taking him through the events of the morning for the third time. "So you dropped the ceiling tile to create a distraction," Detective Chen said, her pen poised over her notepad. "Even though you'd been explicitly told not to engage." Marcus kept his hands flat on the table, maintaining the kind of calm body language he'd learned in military debriefings. "I secured a weapon that had become a threat to a hostage. The distraction was incidental." Incidental? Detective Chen's mouth quirked slightly. "That's a very careful word choice, Mr. Reed." "I'm a very careful person, Detective." She studied him for a long moment, then set down her pen. "For what it's worth, you probably saved Ms. Whitlock's life." Grant Hale had a round chambered and his finger was on the trigger when the lights went out. Forensics confirmed it. The information settled in Marcus's chest like a stone. He'd known intellectually that the situation had been critical, but hearing it stated so baldly made it real in a different way. "Has he said anything? About who helped him get inside?" "Not yet, but he will." Detective Chen leaned back in her chair. "Men like Grant Hale don't have loyalty. They have leverage. And right now we have all the leverage. He's looking at attempted murder, kidnapping, armed robbery, corporate fraud. We'll get him talking." Marcus nodded, though part of him wondered if it was that simple. Grant had struck him as someone who'd planned extensively, which meant he'd probably planned for the possibility of capture too. People with escape routes didn't break easily. The door opened and Tessa Ward stepped in, looking exhausted. "Detective, can I borrow Mr. Reed? His daughter is waiting." "We're done here." Detective Chen stood, extending her hand to Marcus. "Thank you for your cooperation. We'll be in touch if we need anything else." Marcus shook her hand and followed Tessa out into the hallway. The police station was quieter now, the evening shift settling into its rhythm. Through a window, he could see the sky darkening toward dusk. "It's almost 7, Tessa said as they walked toward the exit. "I called Mrs. Chen and explained you'd be late. She said Nora is fine. They made dinner together." Relief flooded through him. "Thank you. I should have. You've been giving statements to police about stopping an armed kidnapping. I think Mrs. Chen understands." Tessa pushed open the station door, letting in the cool evening air. "Besides, you're about to have a lot more flexibility with your schedule." Marcus stopped walking. "What does that mean?" Tessa turned to face him, and her expression was complicated, part amusement, part exasperation, part something that looked like respect. "It means Mrs. Whitlock has been calling me every hour asking when you'd be finished here. It means she's already spoken to HR about a position change. And it means your life is about to get very different. Marcus Reed." The words didn't quite make sense. Marcus had been invisible for 3 years, content with invisibility, never asking for more than a steady paycheck and health insurance. The idea that one act of intervention could change that fundamental dynamic felt surreal. "I don't want special treatment," he said carefully. "I just want to do my job." "Too late." Tessa's smile was wry. "You became visible today, and Vivian Whitlock doesn't forget people who save her life. Trust me on this." She walked him to his truck, an aging Ford that had seen better decades, and paused before he could get in. "Marcus, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "Why maintenance? Your military record shows tactical training, leadership experience, security clearance. You could have done a lot of things. Why choose to be invisible?" Marcus looked at her for a long moment, considering how much to share. "Because visible means complicated. Complicated means unstable. And unstable is the last thing Nora needs. She lost her mother. She's navigating a world that isn't built for deaf kids. What she needs from me is consistency, reliability, someone who comes home every night at the same time, who doesn't bring work stress into the house, who can focus entirely on her." Understanding flickered across Tessa's face. "So you chose invisible." "I chose present," Marcus corrected. "For her, everything else is just details." Tessa nodded slowly. "Well, that's about to get harder, but I think you already know that." She was right. Marcus did know. The moment he'd dropped through that ceiling, the moment he'd secured Grant's weapon, he'd stepped out of invisibility and into something else. There was no going back. He drove to Mrs. Chen's apartment in silence, his mind processing the day's events in fragments, the fear in Vivian Whitlock's eyes, the weight of the weapon in his hand, the sound of Grant's voice counting to 3, the relief when the lights came back on and everyone was still alive. Mrs. Chen's door opened before he could knock. The elderly woman stood there with flour on her hands and concern on her face. "Marcus, are you all right? The news said there was an incident at the hotel." "I'm fine. Is Nora in the kitchen decorating cookies?" Mrs. Chen stepped aside to let him in. "She knows something happened. Children always know. But she's been very patient." Marcus found his daughter at the kitchen table, surrounded by cookies in various states of decoration. Nora looked up when his shadow fell across the table, and her face transformed with relief. Her hands moved in quick, fluid signs. "Dad, you're so late. Mrs. Chen said work was busy, but I was worried." Marcus sat down across from her, his own hands responding automatically. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Something happened at the hotel. But I'm okay. Everyone is okay." Nora studied his face with the kind of intensity that 7-year-olds shouldn't possess, reading information from his expression that he hadn't put into words. "You look tired. Scared tired, not work tired." He should have known better than to try hiding things from her. Nora had learned to read faces the way hearing children learn to read tones, and she was better at it than most adults. "Someone needed help today," Marcus signed carefully, "and I was able to help them. But it was scary for a little while." "Was anyone hurt?" "No, everyone is safe." Nora considered this, then pushed a cookie across the table toward him. "This one is for you. It has extra frosting because extra frosting makes things better." Marcus took the cookie, a misshapen star covered in approximately half a container of blue frosting, and felt something in his chest unclench. This was what mattered, not police statements or position changes or suddenly being visible to people who'd never seen him before. Just this. His daughter, safe and loved and covered in cookie crumbs, believing that extra frosting could fix the world's problems. "Thank you," he signed. "This is perfect." They left Mrs. Chen's apartment 20 minutes later, Nora clutching a container of cookies and chattering with her hands about her day at school. Marcus listened, responded, maintained the routine that had become their anchor: bath time, story time, bed by 8:30, lights out by 9. It wasn't until Nora was asleep, her breathing deep and even in the next room, that Marcus let himself think about what Tessa had said, about Vivian Whitlock calling every hour, about position changes, about life getting different. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Mr. Reed, this is Vivian Whitlock. I hope this isn't too forward, but I got your number from HR. Would you be available to meet tomorrow morning? I'd like to discuss something important. VW." Marcus stared at the message for a long time. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to pretend he could go back to being invisible, to maintain the stable routine that had kept him and Nora afloat for 3 years. But he'd already made his choice when he dropped through that ceiling. The only question now was what came next. He typed back, "Yes. What time?" The response came immediately. "My office, 9 a.m. And Marcus, thank you for everything." Marcus set his phone down and looked at the darkened hallway leading to Nora's room. Whatever Vivian Whitlock wanted to discuss, whatever changes were coming, he'd make sure they didn't disrupt the one thing that mattered most. His daughter would always come first. Everything else would have to work around that. He just hoped Vivian Whitlock understood. The next morning arrived with the kind of nervous energy that made Marcus's coffee taste like anxiety. He dropped Nora at school, her excited signs about show and tell still playing in his mind, and driven to the Whitmore Grand with his stomach in knots. The employee entrance felt different now, like he was walking into a building that had fundamentally changed overnight, even though the architecture remained the same. James, his supervisor, intercepted him in the maintenance corridor. "Reed, we need to talk." Marcus stopped, waiting. James was a decent enough boss, former military himself, someone who understood the value of showing up on time and doing the job without drama. But his expression now was complicated. "HR called me this morning," James said. Said you're being transferred, effective immediately. I haven't agreed to anything yet. Doesn't matter, this came from the top. Like, the very top. James crossed his arms. You want to tell me what the hell happened yesterday? Marcus gave him the abbreviated version, saw something wrong, called it in, helped secure the situation. He left out the part about dropping through the ceiling and disarming a kidnapper. Some details didn't need to be shared. James listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding to something that looked like grudging respect. So you're a hero now. I'm a maintenance worker who was in the right place. Yeah, well, the CEO doesn't see it that way. And what the CEO wants, the CEO gets. James extended his hand. It's been good working with you, Reed. Don't forget where you came from. Marcus shook his hand, feeling the strange finality of the gesture. 3 years of routine, of invisibility, of comfortable predictability, ending with a handshake in a maintenance corridor. He took the elevator to the 6th floor, watching the numbers climb with a sense of surreal detachment. The executive level looked different in daylight, less threatening, though the memory of yesterday's crisis still clung to the air. Police tape marked the conference room. Security personnel had doubled. Everything felt heightened, alert. Patricia Chen, the executive administrator who'd created interruptions, greeted him with a smile that was equal parts warm and conspiratorial. Mr. Reed, Ms. Whitlock is expecting you. Can I get you coffee? Water? I'm fine, thank you. She's been very clear that you're to be treated as a priority guest. Patricia lowered her voice. Between you and me, I've never seen her like this. Shaken, yes, but also determined, like something fundamental shifted yesterday. Marcus didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Patricia led him to Vivian's office, not the conference room where Grant had held her, but her actual private office, a space he'd never seen despite 3 years in the building. It was elegant in the way expensive things were elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city, furniture that probably cost more than his truck, and artwork that looked original rather than prints. But it was also surprisingly personal. Photos of what looked like family on the credenza, a shelf of actual books rather than decorative volumes, a coffee mug with a chipped handle that didn't match the room's polished aesthetic. Vivian stood when he entered, and Marcus was struck by how different she looked. Still professional, still composed, but there was a softness to her expression that hadn't been there before, like seeing death up close had sanded away some protective layer. Marcus, thank you for coming. She gestured to the sitting area by the window rather than the formal desk. Please sit. Can I... Patricia already asked about coffee, didn't she? She did. She's good at that. Vivian sat across from him, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then she said, I've been trying to figure out how to start this conversation, and I keep coming back to the same place. So I'm just going to say it. I'm sorry. Marcus blinked. For what? For 3 years of not seeing you, for treating you like furniture, for building a company culture where people like you are invisible to people like me. Her hands twisted together in her lap. Yesterday, when I was signing for help, and you were the only person who understood, do you know what I realized? No. That I'd created a hierarchy where the people who could save me were the same people I'd spent years looking through. That's not just bad business, Marcus. That's bad humanity. The raw honesty in her voice caught Marcus off guard. He'd expected gratitude, maybe an offer of reward. He hadn't expected genuine self-reflection. You run a hotel empire, he said carefully. You can't personally know every employee. No, but I can create systems that value every employee, and I haven't. I've created systems that value revenue and efficiency and guest satisfaction, but not the human beings who make all of that possible. Vivian leaned forward slightly. I want to change that, and I want your help. Marcus's instinct was to say no, to protect the stability that Nora needed, to retreat back into invisibility. But Vivian's expression stopped him. This wasn't a CEO making a grand gesture. This was a person who'd looked into the abyss and decided to become different on the other side. What kind of help? He asked. I want to create a new position, Director of Employee Safety and Wellness, someone who understands what it's like to work in the trenches, who sees the vulnerabilities that management misses, who can build protocols that actually protect people without putting targets on their backs. She met his gaze directly. I want that someone to be you. The offer hung in the air between them. Director. A management position. The kind of visibility Marcus had spent 3 years avoiding. I'm not qualified, he said. I don't have a degree in HR or safety management or You have combat experience, leadership training, the ability to stay calm in crisis situations. And most importantly, you understand what it means to be overlooked. Vivian's voice was firm. Those qualifications matter more than a diploma, Marcus. You proved that yesterday. I have a daughter, 7 years old. She needs consistency, routine. I can't take a job that requires 60-hour weeks or constant travel, or the position comes with flexible hours, remote work options, and a salary that would let you afford better childcare if you need it. Vivian pulled a folder from the side table and slid it across to him. This is the preliminary job description and compensation package. Take it home. Read it. Think about whether this could work for you and Nora. Marcus opened the folder, and the salary number on the first page made his breath catch. It was more than double what he currently made. Enough to move out of their cramped apartment, enough to afford the speech therapy Nora's audiologist had recommended, enough to build the kind of security he'd been scraping together paycheck by paycheck. This is too much, he said. It's market rate for the position, and frankly, it's less than you're worth. Vivian stood, moving to the window. Marcus, I know this is overwhelming. I know you didn't ask for any of this. But yesterday, you saved my life, and more than that, you saved my company. Grant had documents that would have transferred controlling interest to a shell corporation. If he'd succeeded, hundreds of people would have lost their jobs in the restructuring that followed. You didn't just save me, you saved all of them. Marcus hadn't thought about it that way. He'd been focused on the immediate threat, the weapon, the hostage, the ticking clock. The broader implications hadn't registered. Who was helping him? The question came out before Marcus could stop it. Grant didn't get into this building alone. Someone gave him access codes, schedules, security protocols. Vivian's expression hardened. We're still investigating, but we have suspicions. Someone high level. Yes. She turned back from the window. Which is another reason I need someone I can trust in a position of authority. Someone who isn't part of the existing power structure, who doesn't owe favors or have divided loyalties. Someone who proved yesterday that they'll do the right thing even when it's dangerous. Marcus looked down at the folder again. Director of Employee Safety and Wellness. A title that meant responsibility, visibility, the end of the comfortable invisibility he'd maintained for 3 years. But also opportunity. Security. The chance to make sure what happened to Vivian didn't happen to anyone else. Can I ask you something? He said. Anything. Why did you learn sign language, Ishi? Yesterday you were signing for help. That's not something people just know. Vivian's expression softened. My younger brother was born with severe hearing loss. He died when I was 23. Car accident, nothing to do with his disability, but I spent years signing with him, and I never forgot. Yesterday, when Grant had that gun on me, signing was the only thing I could think of. I didn't even know if anyone would understand. I had to try. The shared connection of ASL, the bridge between Vivian's desperation and Marcus's ability to help, suddenly felt less like coincidence and more like something else. Not fate. Marcus didn't believe in fate, but maybe alignment. Two people whose lives had prepared them for one specific moment. I need to think about this, Marcus said, closing the folder. Talk to Nora. Figure out if this works for our life. Of course, take all the time you need. Vivian walked him to the door, then paused. Marcus, one more thing. Yesterday, when I hugged you, I know that was probably uncomfortable, inappropriate even. But I needed you to know that I saw you. Really saw you. And I'm not going to unsee you again. Marcus met her gaze and saw genuine emotion there. Not just gratitude, but recognition. The kind of scene that went both ways. I appreciate that, he said. He left her office with the folder tucked under his arm, his mind spinning with possibilities and fears in equal measure. Patricia caught his eye as he passed her desk and gave him a subtle thumbs up. In the elevator, 2 executives nodded to him, actually acknowledged his presence, in a way that never would have happened yesterday. Visibility was already changing things. Marcus drove home in a daze, the the folder sitting on his passenger seat like a live grenade. By the time he pulled into his apartment complex, he'd mentally rehearsed the conversation with Nora a dozen times. How did you explain to a 7-year-old that everything might be about to change? That stability might have to be sacrificed for opportunity? He picked her up from school at 3:30, and Nora immediately signed, "You look weird. Good weird or bad weird?" "I don't know yet," Marcus signed back honestly. "Let's go get ice cream and talk about it." They went to the shop 2 blocks from their apartment, the one where Nora always got chocolate chip cookie dough and Marcus always got boring vanilla. They sat at their usual table by the window, and Marcus pulled out the folder. "Remember how I helped someone at work yesterday?" he signed. Nora nodded, her spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Well, the woman I helped wants to offer me a different job, a bigger job. It would mean more money, which means we could move to a better apartment, and you could have your own room, and we could afford the therapy Dr. Martinez talked about." Nora's eyes went wide. "My own room?" "Yeah, and maybe a backyard. Somewhere you could have a dog if you wanted." "A dog?" Nora's signs got big and excited. Ice cream forgotten. "Really? We could get a dog?" Marcus couldn't help but smile. "Maybe, if we take this job. But it also means my work would be different. I'd have more responsibilities. Sometimes I might have to work late or travel for meetings. It would mean changes, Nora. Big changes." Nora thought about this with the seriousness she brought to important decisions. Which flavor of ice cream? Which library book to check out? Which shoes to wear to school? Her face scrunched up in concentration. Then she signed, "Would you still pick me up from school?" "Yes, that's non-negotiable." "Would you still read to me at bedtime?" "Every night." "Would you still be my dad?" The question hit Marcus harder than it should have. "Always, sweetheart. No job changes that." Nora nodded, satisfied. "Then I think you should take it, because you're really good at helping people, and also because I really want a dog." Marcus laughed, genuinely laughed for the first time since yesterday's crisis. Leave it to a 7-year-old to cut through all the complexity and anxiety and focus on what actually mattered: dogs, bedtime stories, the fundamentals of love and security that no job title could change. "Okay," he signed. "I'll call Ms. Whitlock and tell her yes." "Does she know sign language?" Nora asked suddenly. "Is that how you helped her?" "She does. She learned for her brother, like I learned for you." Nora's expression became very serious. "Then she's good people. Dad, you should help good people. That's what heroes do." "I'm not a hero, Nora. You are to me." Marcus pulled his daughter into a hug, feeling her small body pressed against his chest, her heart beating steady and trusting. This was why invisibility had been worth it, to protect this, to preserve this, to make sure Nora grew up safe and loved and confident. But maybe visibility didn't have to threaten that. Maybe it could enhance it. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to Vivian. "I'll take the position. When do I start?" The response came 30 seconds later. "Monday." And Marcus, "Thank you. You won't regret this." Marcus hoped she was right. He also knew that life rarely worked out the way people planned, that change was inherently risky, that stepping out of invisibility meant accepting vulnerability. But he also knew that yesterday, in that conference room, he'd made a choice to act instead of hide, and that choice had saved a life. Maybe it was time to keep choosing courage instead of safety, for himself, and for the daughter who believed her dad was a hero, even if he didn't feel like one yet. The weekend passed in a blur of logistics. Marcus gave notice to his apartment complex, started researching neighborhoods with good schools for deaf students, and spent Saturday afternoon looking at the preliminary training materials Vivian had sent over. The scope of the position was both exciting and terrifying. He'd be responsible for developing safety protocols across all 5 Whitmore properties, training staff on threat recognition, implementing silent alert systems for employees in danger. It was the kind of work that mattered, that could genuinely make people safer. Sunday evening, his phone rang. Tessa Ward's name appeared on the screen. "Marcus, we've got a problem," she said without preamble. "Grant Hale's lawyer is claiming coercion, says the weapon seizure was illegal because you're not law enforcement. They're trying to get the charges reduced." Marcus's stomach dropped. "Can they do that?" "Probably not, But they can make noise, and the noise is causing complications. Tessa's voice was tight with frustration. There's also something else. We found the inside person, the one who helped Grant access the building. Who? Charles Brennan, VP of Operations. He's been with the Whitmore for 8 years. Tessa paused. Marcus, he's claiming he was coerced too. Says Grant had leverage on him, threatened his family. His lawyer is already building a defense. Marcus processed this. Charles Brennan, he knew the name, had seen the man in passing. Mid-50s, always well-dressed. The kind of person who moved through the building with authority. The kind of person nobody would suspect. Do you believe him? Marcus asked. That he was coerced? I don't know. Evidence shows he provided access codes and schedules, but motivation is harder to prove. Could be fear, could be greed, could be both. Tessa sighed. Vivian is meeting with lawyers tomorrow to figure out next steps. This is going to get complicated before it gets simple. After hanging up, Marcus sat in his darkened living room, listening to Nora's soft breathing from the next room. He'd thought the crisis was over, Grant arrested, Vivian safe, justice served. But real life was messier than that. Real life had lawyers and coercion defenses and inside conspirators claiming victimhood. Real life required sustained courage, not just one moment of action. His phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Vivian. I heard from Tessa. I know this is complicated, but I want you to know, whatever happens with the legal proceedings, you did the right thing, and I'm still committed to the changes we discussed. Starting with you. See you Monday. Marcus read the message twice, then set his phone down. Monday. His first day as Director of Employee Safety and Wellness. His first day of visibility. His first day of a completely different life. He walked to Nora's room and stood in the doorway, watching her sleep. She'd asked for the dog book from the library, and it lay open on her chest, rising and falling with her breath. In sleep, she looked so small, so vulnerable. The weight of protecting her felt enormous. But maybe protection didn't always mean hiding. Maybe sometimes it meant stepping forward, taking risks, trusting that courage could build something better than safety ever could. Marcus closed his daughter's door gently and went to pack for Monday. The game had changed. He was visible now. Time to figure out what that meant. Monday morning arrived with the kind of nervous energy that made Marcus's hands shake as he knotted his tie. He'd bought it Saturday, his first tie in 3 years, navy blue with thin silver stripes that the sales clerk had assured him was professional but not stuffy. Now staring at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, he barely recognized himself. Gone was the maintenance uniform that had been his armor of invisibility. In its place, pressed slacks, a button-down shirt, and the unmistakable markers of someone who mattered. Nora appeared in the doorway, already dressed for school, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Her hands moved quickly. You look fancy. Like TV fancy. Marcus smiled despite his nerves. Too fancy? No, good fancy. The kind that means important. She paused, studying his face with the intensity she brought to reading emotions. But you're scared. There was no point lying to her. Nora could read anxiety on his face better than most therapists. Yeah, sweetheart, I'm scared. Why? How did you explain to a 7-year-old that visibility felt like standing naked in a spotlight? That after years of deliberate invisibility, suddenly being seen felt like a violation of everything that had kept him safe? Because it's new, Marcus signed carefully. And new things are always a little scary, even when they're good things. Nora considered this with the gravity she brought to complex problems. Then her hands moved again. When I started school and everyone could hear except me, I was really scared. But you told me being different wasn't bad, just different. Maybe being fancy important is like that? Marcus pulled his daughter into a hug, marveling at how 7-year-olds could accidentally deliver profound wisdom while still believing in the tooth fairy. You're right, thank you. Also, you should bring extra coffee because important people always have coffee on TV. Noted. The drive to the Whitmore Grand felt surreal. Marcus had made this commute hundreds of times, but always as background, always as someone passing through other people's stories. Now he was parking in the management section of the garage, taking the executive elevator, walking through corridors where people actually met his eyes and nodded. The shift in perception was dizzying. Patricia greeted him at the sixth floor with a genuine smile. "Mr. Reed, welcome. Ms. Whitlock is running a few minutes behind. Conference call with Singapore. Can I show you to your office?" The words, "your office," hit him like a physical thing. He followed Patricia down a hallway he'd only ever cleaned, past doors marked with titles like Chief Financial Officer and VP of Guest Relations. She stopped at a door near the end, unmarked except for a temporary placard that read, Director of Employee Safety and Wellness. "We're having a permanent nameplate made," Patricia said, opening the door. "Should be ready by Wednesday." The office wasn't as large as Vivian's, but it was still 3 times the size of his apartment's living room. Windows along one wall offered a view of the city. A substantial desk sat near the back, already equipped with a computer, phone, and a stack of orientation materials. 2 chairs faced the desk for meetings, and a small sitting area occupied the corner near the windows. "The IT team will be by at 10 to set up your credentials and email," Patricia continued. "HR scheduled your orientation for 11, and Ms. Whitlock asked if you could meet her for lunch at 12:30 to discuss initial priorities." Marcus nodded, only half listening, his attention caught by the shelves lining one wall. Empty now, waiting to be filled with whatever a Director of Employee Safety and Wellness was supposed to display. Certifications, probably, training manuals, evidence of authority. He had no idea what he was doing. "Mr. Reed?" Patricia's voice pulled him back. "Are you all right?" "Yeah, sorry, just adjusting." "It's overwhelming, I know, but you'll do fine. Everyone's already talking about what you did last week. You have credibility here that most people spend years building." She moved toward the door. "I'll bring coffee in a few minutes. How do you take it?" "Black is fine. Thank you." After Patricia left, Marcus stood in the center of his new office and tried to breathe normally. Through the window, he could see the city waking up, traffic flowing, people moving with purpose. The machinery of commerce grinding forward. Somewhere down there was the elementary school where Nora was probably settling into her desk, unaware that her father was currently having a mild existential crisis 6 floors above the marble lobby. The computer monitor flickered to life, displaying a login screen. Marcus sat behind the desk, his desk, and felt the chair adjust automatically to his weight. Everything about this space screamed professional competence, which made his own sense of being a fraud that much sharper. His phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. "I know you're probably panicking. Don't. You earned this. See you at lunch." Marcus almost laughed. Was he that transparent, or did Vivian just remember what it felt like to be thrown into deep water? The morning passed in a blur of technical setup and HR paperwork. By 11, Marcus had login credentials, an email address with director in the signature line, and a benefits package that included dental insurance that actually covered Nora's specialists. The HR representative, a kind woman named Janet, who'd been with the Whitmore for 15 years, walked him through policies and procedures with the patience of someone who understood that information overload was a real thing. "Now about your direct reports," Janet said, pulling up an organizational chart on her tablet. "You'll have a team of 4 initially, 2 safety coordinators, 1 wellness program manager, and 1 administrative assistant. They're all current employees being transferred from other departments. You'll meet them this afternoon." Direct reports. People who would look to him for leadership, guidance, decisions. The weight of responsibility settled heavier on Marcus's shoulders. What if I'm not qualified to lead them? The question escaped before he could censor it. Janet looked up from her tablet, her expression shifting from professional courtesy to something warmer. "Mr. Reed, can I be frank?" "Please." "I've worked here long enough to see a lot of leadership changes. Some people get promoted because they've mastered corporate politics. Some because they've been here forever. Some because they look good in a suit." She leaned forward slightly. "You got promoted because when it mattered most, you did the right thing even though it was dangerous. That kind of integrity can't be taught. Everything else, management skills, corporate protocols, bureaucratic navigation, those can be learned. But courage and moral clarity? You either have those or you don't. And you do." The words settled something in Marcus's chest. Not the anxiety, that was still there, but the sense that he was fundamentally inadequate. Maybe he was unqualified in traditional ways, but maybe traditional qualifications weren't what this position actually needed. Thank you, he said quietly. You're welcome. Now, let's talk about your budget allocation. By 12:30, Marcus's brain was full to bursting with information about employee assistance programs, OSHA compliance requirements, and incident reporting protocols. When Patricia appeared at his door to escort him to lunch, he followed gratefully, needing the break from information overload. Vivian had reserved a private dining room on the hotel's restaurant level, not the main dining area where guests ate, but a smaller space used for business meetings. She was already there when Marcus arrived, looking composed and professional in a charcoal dress that probably cost more than his entire new wardrobe. Marcus, thank you for making time. She gestured to the table where 2 place settings waited. I hope you don't mind. I took the liberty of ordering. The chef here does an excellent salmon, and I figured you haven't had time to look at a menu. That's fine. Thank you. They sat, and for a moment there was awkward silence. Marcus realized they'd never had a normal conversation. Their entire relationship had been built in crisis, formed in the pressure cooker of life-threatening emergency. Sitting across from each other over lunch, discussing work like colleagues, felt strange. Vivian seemed to sense his discomfort. This is weird, isn't it? We saved each other's lives, but we don't actually know each other. Marcus relaxed slightly. Yeah, it's weird. Well, let's fix that. Tell me about Nora. What's she like? The question caught Marcus off guard, but talking about his daughter was easy, natural. He found himself describing her fierce intelligence, her ability to read people, her absolute conviction that dogs made everything better. Vivian listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was actually paying attention. She sounds remarkable, Vivian said when Marcus paused. And you're raising her alone? Her mother died 3 years ago, cancer. It was... Marcus stopped, surprised by the tightness in his throat. He rarely talked about Sarah's death, had built walls around that grief to function through it. It was fast, 6 months from diagnosis to the end. Nora was only 4. Vivian's expression softened with understanding. I'm so sorry. That must have been devastating. It was. Still is some days. Marcus took a breath, steadying himself. But Nora needed me to be functional, so I became functional. Took the maintenance job here because it was stable, predictable. Everything in our life became about creating security for her, which is why you chose invisibility. Yeah. And now I'm asking you to give that up. Vivian set down her fork, meeting his gaze directly. Marcus, I need you to know that flexibility for Nora isn't just something I'm offering to be generous. It's non-negotiable. Your daughter comes first. If that means leaving at 3:30 for school pickup, you leave. If that means working from home when she's sick, you work from home. This position is important, but your daughter is more important. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't corporate lip service about work-life balance. This was a woman who'd almost died understanding exactly what mattered. Thank you, Marcus said. That means more than you know. I do know, actually. My brother, the one who was deaf, he died because he was rushing, had a meeting he didn't want to miss, took a corner too fast, lost control of the car. Vivian's voice went quiet. I used to think success meant never missing meetings, never showing weakness, never prioritizing personal over professional. But watching you with Nora, the way you structured your entire life around her needs, that's not weakness. That's strength I never had. Marcus didn't know what to say to that. The rawness in Vivian's admission felt too personal for a business lunch, too intimate for their still-forming professional relationship, but it also felt honest in a way that corporate interactions rarely were. So, Vivian said, her tone shifting back to business, let's talk about priorities. What do you see as the most urgent needs for employee safety? Marcus had been thinking about this since accepting the position. Communication systems. What happened with you, me seeing your signs, that was pure luck. But we can't rely on luck. We need protocols that let employees signal for help without alerting whoever is threatening them. Go on. Silent panic buttons, maybe. Something integrated into employee badges or phones. Press it, and security gets an alert with location data. No sound, no visible indicator, just a direct line to help. Marcus warmed to the topic, his military training kicking in. We also need better situational awareness training, Most employees wouldn't recognize a coerced hostage if they saw one. They assume everything is normal until it's obviously not. That gap between something being wrong and it being obviously wrong, that's where people get hurt. Vivian was nodding, her expression intent. What about insider threats? Charles Brennan had access to sensitive information for 8 years. How do we prevent that? You can't, not completely, but you can limit exposure, compartmentalize information so no single person has enough access to compromise the whole system. Regular security audits, behavioral monitoring, not surveillance, but attention to changes in patterns that might indicate coercion or blackmail. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need. Vivian pulled out a tablet, making notes. I want you to develop a comprehensive proposal. 60 days to research, design, and present a safety overhaul for all 5 properties. Budget is flexible, within reason, and you'll have full executive support. 60 days, Marcus's mind was already racing with possibilities and logistics. I'll need to visit the other properties, see their layouts, interview staff, understand their specific vulnerabilities. Absolutely. We'll arrange travel as needed. Vivian paused. Which brings me to something else. The foundation I mentioned, the one in Nora's name. I've been working with my lawyers to structure it properly. The mission is supporting families with children who have disabilities, specifically funding therapy, education, and accessibility resources that insurance doesn't cover. Marcus's throat went tight again. Vivian, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. Marcus, you saved my life. More than that, you reminded me that the people building my company's success are human beings with lives and struggles that matter. That's worth more than money. She met his gaze. But I also need you to understand that this foundation isn't charity. It's justice. There are thousands of families like yours struggling to afford basic support for their kids. That's wrong. And I have the resources to help fix it. Marcus thought about the speech therapy Nora needed, the specialized programs that would help her thrive, all the things he'd put off because the cost was insurmountable on a maintenance worker's salary. The idea that those barriers might come down for other families, that Nora's name would be attached to something that made real difference. Okay, he said. Thank you. Truly. You'll be on the Foundation's board if you're willing. Your insight as a parent navigating these systems is invaluable. Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent tone. He glanced at the screen and felt his stomach drop. Nora's school. They only called during the day if something was wrong. I'm sorry. I have to take this. He answered quickly. Hello? Mr. Reed, this is Principal Martinez. Nora is fine, but there's been an incident. Can you come to the school? What happened? It's better discussed in person. She's not hurt, but she's upset. We're in my office. Marcus was already standing. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Vivian waved away his apology before he could voice it. Go. Family first, remember? We'll continue this later. Marcus drove to the elementary school with his heart pounding, running through scenarios. Injury, but Principal Martinez had said she wasn't hurt. Bullying, that had happened before, kids making fun of her signing or her speech. Behavioral issue, though Nora was usually well-behaved, trauma sometimes manifested in unexpected ways. The school's front office was familiar territory. Marcus signed in and was immediately escorted to the principal's office, where he found Nora sitting in a chair, her face blotchy from crying. When she saw him, her hands moved frantically. Dad, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, but they were being mean, and I just... Slow down, sweetheart. Marcus knelt in front of her, signing back. Take a breath. Tell me what happened. Principal Martinez, a kind woman in her 50s who'd been supportive of Nora since enrollment, spoke gently. There was an altercation during lunch. Another student made comments about Nora's hearing aids and her signing. Nora responded by pushing the student, who fell and scraped her knee. The other girl is fine, just shaken. But our policy on physical contact is very clear. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. This wasn't the first time Nora had been targeted, but it was the first time she'd responded with aggression. What exactly did the other student say? According to witnesses, she told Nora that deaf people were broken and weird. Principal Martinez's expression was pained. I want to be clear, Mr. Reed. We don't tolerate that kind of language. The other student is being disciplined for bullying, but Nora's physical response also violates school policy. Marcus turned back to his daughter, whose hands were twisted in her lap. Nora, look at me. What the other girl said was cruel and wrong, but pushing her, that's not okay. You know that, right? Nora's signs came small and guilty. I know, but I was so angry. She said mean things about you too. Said my dad was just a janitor and that's why we're poor. The words hit Marcus like a punch. The other student had weaponized his invisibility, his former position, turned it into ammunition against his daughter. And Nora had defended him the only way a 7-year-old knew how, with physical force. Sweetheart, I need you to listen very carefully. Marcus's hands moved slowly, making sure she understood every word. What I do for work doesn't define my worth. What you can or can't hear doesn't define yours. People who say cruel things are showing their own pain, not truth about us. And we don't respond to pain with more pain. We respond with dignity. But she was wrong about you. Yes, she was. But pushing her didn't make her less wrong. It just gave her ammunition to say you're the problem. Marcus took a breath. You're going to meet a lot of people in life who don't understand, who say hurtful things. And every time you get to choose, do I respond with anger or with something better? Nora's face crumpled. I wanted to make her stop. I know, and that's human, but there are better ways. Marcus looked at Principal Martinez. What's the consequence? 1 day in-school suspension. She'll spend tomorrow in the counselor's office with supervised work. And I'd like to arrange a mediation session with both girls and their parents, if you're willing. Marcus nodded. We'll do whatever helps Nora learn from this. The drive home was quiet. Nora stared out the window, her small hand still in her lap. Marcus gave her space to process, knowing that shame and anger were complicated emotions that needed time to settle. When they reached the apartment, Nora finally signed. Are you mad at me? No, sweetheart. I'm sad that you're hurting, and I'm disappointed that you made a choice that hurt someone else. But I'm not mad. The girl at school was right, though. We are poor. Our apartment is small, and we don't have a car that works good, and I can't do the programs other kids do because they cost too much. Marcus sat down on the couch, pulling Nora beside him. We're not rich, that's true. But poor isn't about money, Nora. Poor is about having no love, no safety, no people who care about you. We have all of those things. We're not poor where it matters. But the new job, that's going to change things, right? We'll have more money? Yes, things are going to change. We'll be able to afford a better place to live. The therapy you need. Maybe even a dog. Marcus paused, making sure she was looking at him. But those things don't make us better people. They just make life a little easier. What makes us good people is how we treat others, especially when they're cruel to us. Nora leaned against him, and Marcus wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They sat like that for a long time, processing the day's chaos in the quiet comfort of proximity. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. Everything okay with Nora? He typed back, She's fine, school incident. We're handling it. Take whatever time you need. And Marcus, I meant what I said about family first. Marcus looked at his daughter, curled against his side, still working through complex emotions about identity and worth and how to respond to cruelty. This was what mattered. Not job titles or office space or salary increases. This small human who trusted him to guide her through a world that wasn't always kind. His phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification. Subject line. Personnel file. Charles Brennan investigation. Marcus opened it, scanning quickly. The email was from Tessa Ward, copying him on the internal investigation findings. Charles Brennan had indeed been coerced. Grant Hale had evidence of an affair Brennan had conducted 3 years prior, had threatened to expose it unless Brennan provided access to Vivian's schedule and security protocols. The investigation recommended termination, but acknowledged the complicated nature of coercion. Marcus read through the details with a growing sense of unease. Brennan had made bad choices, yes, but he'd also been targeted, exploited, forced into an impossible position. The line between victim and accomplice was blurrier than Marcus wanted it to be. He thought about what he'd told Nora, that people who said cruel things were showing their own pain. What about people who made terrible choices under threat? Where did accountability end and compassion begin? These were the questions he'd be wrestling with in his new position. Not just logistics and protocols, but the messy human reality of fear, coercion, and impossible choices. Marcus set his phone aside and focused on his daughter. Tomorrow he'd think about safety systems and employee protection. Tomorrow he'd navigate the complicated waters of corporate leadership. Tonight, he just needed to be a father. The week continued in a blur of orientation, meetings, and the slow process of building credibility in a role he'd never trained for. Marcus met his team, the 4 employees who'd been reassigned to work under his direction, and found them cautiously optimistic. 2 of them had been at the hotel during the crisis with Grant Hale, had seen the footage, knew the story. Their respect felt unearned but genuine. By Thursday, Marcus had drafted preliminary plans for the silent alert system. By Friday, he'd scheduled site visits to the other 4 Whitmore properties. And by the following Monday, he'd successfully managed his first full week as a director without completely imploding. The adjustment wasn't seamless. There were moments of imposter syndrome so intense, Marcus had to lock his office door and breathe through panic attacks. There were meetings where corporate jargon flew over his head like a foreign language. There were late nights researching management techniques and employee safety best practices, trying to fill the gaps in his knowledge. But there were also moments of clarity. When he interviewed maintenance staff about their safety concerns, and they opened up in ways they never would have to traditional management. When his military background allowed him to see security vulnerabilities that career hotel executives missed. When his experience as a single parent informed policies around family emergencies and flexible scheduling. Slowly, Marcus began to understand that his unconventional path to this position wasn't a weakness. It was the whole point. 2 weeks after starting his new role, Marcus was in his office reviewing security camera footage from the Boston property when Vivian knocked on his open door. "Got a minute?" she asked. "Of course." She entered, closing the door behind her, unusual enough to signal this was serious. "The prosecutors want to meet with us. They're finalizing charges against Grant Hale and need our testimony locked down. Can you come to the DA's office tomorrow afternoon?" Marcus checked his calendar. "Nora has a doctor's appointment at 3. What time would work?" "I could do morning, 10 o'clock." "I'll make it happen." Vivian sat in one of the chairs facing his desk. "Marcus, I need to prepare you for something. Grant's lawyers are going to try to discredit your intervention. They'll argue you had no authority to act, that the weapon seizure was illegal, that you escalated the situation unnecessarily. I know, Detective Chen warned me. They'll also dig into your background, your military service, your employment history, any vulnerabilities they can exploit." Vivian's expression was apologetic. "I'm telling you this not to scare you, but so you're not blindsided." Marcus thought about his service record, the classified operations he couldn't discuss, the medical discharge that followed his second tour. There were parts of his past that didn't fit neatly into a courtroom narrative. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "The truth. Just tell the truth about what you saw, what you did, why you did it. The prosecutors are confident the charges will stick, but they need our testimony to be airtight." "Okay, I can do that." Vivian stood to leave, then paused. "How are you settling in, really?" Marcus considered the question. The honest answer was complicated, exhausted, overwhelmed, constantly terrified of failure, but also strangely energized by work that felt meaningful. Instead, he said, "It's an adjustment, but I'm managing." "That's all any of us do, manage." Vivian smiled slightly. "For what it's worth, the executive team is impressed. You've accomplished more in 2 weeks than most directors manage in 3 months. After she left, Marcus returned to the security footage, but his mind kept drifting to the upcoming testimony. Facing Grant Hale again, this time in a courtroom instead of a crisis. Having his actions scrutinized, questioned, potentially undermined by lawyers whose job was to create reasonable doubt. His phone buzzed. A text from Nora's teacher. "Nora had a great day today. She volunteered to present her project to the class using ASL and voice together. Very brave. Thought you'd want to know." Marcus smiled, the anxiety about testimony fading slightly. Whatever happened in court, whatever challenges came with this new visibility, he had this, a daughter brave enough to stand in front of her class and own her difference. That was worth any amount of scrutiny. The foundation Vivian had mentioned was becoming real, too. Legal documents arrived for his review, outlining the structure and mission of the Nora Reed Foundation for Accessible Family Support. Seeing his daughter's name attached to something that would help thousands of families felt surreal and humbling in equal measure. Marcus signed the board member agreement and sent it back, knowing that visibility now extended beyond just him. Nora's name would be public, associated with disability advocacy and family support. It was exposure he'd spent years avoiding, but for a cause that mattered more than privacy. That evening, as he helped Nora with homework at their small kitchen table, she asked, "Dad, what does foundation mean?" Marcus explained it in simple terms: an organization that helped families who needed support, named after her because she was brave and strong and represented what the foundation stood for. Nora processed this with her characteristic seriousness. Then her hands moved. "So other kids like me will get help because of my name?" "Yes." "That's good. I like that." She returned to her math worksheet, apparently satisfied. Then she looked up again. "Dad, do you like your new job?" The question was more complex than Nora realized. Did he like it? Felt too simple for the tangle of emotions the position evoked. But looking at his daughter's earnest face, Marcus realized the real question was whether the trade-off was worth it. Security for visibility, stability for impact, comfortable invisibility for meaningful exposure. "Yeah, sweetheart," he signed. "I do." And surprisingly, he realized it was true. The district attorney's office occupied a gray building that looked like it had been designed to intimidate, all concrete angles and small windows that let in minimal light. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, his tie feeling too tight despite having loosened it twice in the parking garage. Vivian was already there, seated in the waiting area with her lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Reeves, who'd built a career on corporate litigation. "Marcus, good morning." Catherine stood to shake his hand, her grip firm and assessing. "We'll be meeting with ADA Michael Torres. He's handling the prosecution against Grant Hale. Straightforward guy, no games. He'll walk us through what to expect during testimony." They were led to a conference room where a man in his late 30s sat surrounded by case files and legal pads covered in dense handwriting. Ada Torres looked tired in the way people who cared too much about their work always looked tired. Shadows under his eyes, coffee stains on his shirt cuff, but an alertness in his gaze that said he missed nothing. "Miss Whitlock, Mr. Reed, thank you for coming." Torres gestured to the chairs across from him. "I know this process is invasive and uncomfortable, but your testimony is crucial. Grant Hale is facing serious charges: kidnapping, attempted murder, armed robbery, corporate fraud. We need to make sure our case is airtight." "What's his defense strategy?" Vivian asked, her voice steady, but Marcus could see tension in her shoulders. "Two-pronged. First, they're claiming the corporate documents were a legitimate business transaction that you agreed to under negotiation, not coercion. Second, they're arguing that Mr. Reed's intervention was unlawful seizure by a civilian, which taints the evidence." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "I secured a weapon that was being used to threaten someone's life." "I know, and legally you were within your rights. Citizens can intervene in life-threatening situations. But Hale's lawyers are going to paint you as a vigilante who escalated the situation." Torres looked at Marcus directly. "They're going to dig into your military record, looking for anything that suggests aggression or poor judgment. Any disciplinary actions, any incidents that could be twisted into a pattern of reckless behavior." Marcus had known this was coming, but hearing it stated so bluntly still felt like a gut punch. "My service record is clean. 2 tours, honorable discharge, multiple commendations." "What about the medical discharge? What was the cause?" The question hung in the air. Marcus hadn't discussed this with anyone at the Whitmore except HR, and even that had been minimal disclosure. Vivian was watching him with concern, clearly unaware there was a medical component to his military exit. "PTSD, Marcus said finally. "Not severe enough to be disabling, but enough that continuing active combat duty was inadvisable. I did 6 months of therapy, got cleared for civilian work, and moved on." Torres made notes. "Hale's team will try to use that. They'll suggest your judgment was impaired by trauma, that you saw threats that weren't there or overreacted to a manageable situation." "That's ridiculous," Vivian interjected. "I was there. I was signing for help because I had a gun pressed to my spine. There was no overreaction. I agree. But we need to be prepared for their arguments. Torres turned to a new page in his legal pad. Ms. Whitlock, walk me through the signing. Why did you choose that method of communication? Vivian explained about her brother, about ASL being the only language Grant wouldn't understand, about the desperate hope that someone, somewhere might see and comprehend. Torres listened intently, occasionally interrupting with clarifying questions. And Mr. Reed, you understood the signs because of your daughter? Yes. Nora is deaf. I've been signing with her for 3 years. That's going to play well with a jury. The human element of a father using skills learned for his disabled daughter to save someone's life. Torres paused. I need to ask something difficult. Is Nora prepared to be mentioned in court? Defense attorneys might try to bring her into this, suggest you were seeking attention or recognition to benefit her somehow. Marcus felt anger flash hot in his chest. My daughter has nothing to do with this. She's 7 years old. If they try to drag her into their defense strategy, we'll object immediately, Catherine Reeves cut in smoothly. Any attempt to involve a minor child would be shut down by the judge. But Michael is right to warn you. They'll look for any angle. The meeting continued for another hour, Torres walking them through timeline questions, asking about specific details that would need to be corroborated with security footage and witness statements. By the time they finished, Marcus felt wrung out. Every moment of that day in the conference room with Grant Hale relived and examined from a dozen different angles. As they left the building, Vivian touched Marcus's arm gently. I'm sorry, I didn't know about the PTSD. If I'd known it would be used against you. It's fine, Marcus interrupted. I'm not ashamed of it. Combat changes people. Getting help for that isn't weakness. No, it's not. Vivian's expression was thoughtful. But it's going to be hard having your trauma weaponized in a courtroom. Marcus thought about Nora, about the advice he'd given her after the school incident. Respond with dignity, not anger. Choose how to react to cruelty. I'll handle it. The truth is on our side. The truth doesn't always win in court. Then we make sure it does this time. They parted in the parking garage, Vivian heading back to the hotel for afternoon meetings, while Marcus drove to Nora's doctor's appointment. The pediatrician's office was familiar territory. They'd been coming here since Nora was a baby, before the hearing loss diagnosis, when life had been simpler and Sarah had still been alive. Dr. Martinez greeted them with her usual warmth. Nora, you've grown since I saw you last. Let's check your height. The appointment was routine, growth measurements, development questions, a discussion about whether Nora should try the new hearing aid model that had just been approved. Marcus half listened while his mind kept drifting back to the DA's office, to the upcoming trial, to the ways his past would be dissected for public consumption. Mr. Reed, are you all right? Dr. Martinez's voice pulled him back. She was watching him with the concerned expression medical professionals got when they noticed something off. Sorry, distracted. Work stuff. Must be quite a change, the new position. HR sent over updated insurance forms. The benefits package is significantly better than your previous coverage. Yeah, it's been an adjustment. Nora, sitting on the examination table and swinging her legs, signed to Marcus, You look worried, like test worried. Marcus forced a smile. Just thinking about work, I'm fine. But Nora's expression said she didn't believe him, and Dr. Martinez's professional courtesy suggested she didn't either. The appointment wrapped up with recommendations for continued speech therapy and a follow-up in 6 months. As they left, Nora's hand found Marcus's, her small fingers squeezing in the universal language of I'm here with you. That evening, Marcus tried to focus on helping Nora with her homework, but his attention kept fracturing. The trial was 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to prepare testimony, to fortify himself against attacks on his character, to make sure Grant Hale faced consequences for what he'd done. His phone rang. Tessa Ward's name appeared on the screen. Marcus, we've got a situation. Her voice was tight. Charles Brennan's lawyer just filed a motion claiming his client is being scapegoated. They're arguing that Brennan was a victim of coercion and shouldn't face termination. Can they do that? They can try. It's going to arbitration next week. Vivian wants you there. You'll be asked about security protocols and whether Brennan's access should have been more restricted. Another meeting, another examination, another opportunity to have his decisions questioned and his authority challenged. Marcus felt the weight of visibility pressing down harder. I'll be there, he said. After hanging up, Marcus stood in his small kitchen and let himself feel the full magnitude of what he'd taken on. This wasn't just a new job. It was a complete restructuring of his life, his identity, his relationship with risk and safety. Every decision he made now would be scrutinized. Every choice would have consequences that rippled beyond just him and Nora. The apartment suddenly felt claustrophobic, too small, too shabby, too reminiscent of the life he'd been content with just weeks ago. Marcus looked around at the worn furniture, the water stain on the ceiling he'd never gotten fixed, the cramped kitchen where he and Nora ate dinner every night at a table meant for two. He pulled out his phone and opened the real estate app he'd downloaded but never used. It was time to start looking for something better. Not because the apartment was shameful, but because they deserved space, room to breathe. A place where Nora could have her own room, where Marcus could have a home office, where their lives could expand instead of constantly compressing. The search results showed houses in neighborhoods he'd never considered, with price tags that would have been laughable on his maintenance salary, but were suddenly, impossibly within reach. Marcus scrolled through photos of backyards and second floors and kitchens with actual counter space, feeling a mix of excitement and guilt. Was he allowed to want this? To take advantage of opportunity that had come from trauma? To build something better on the foundation of someone else's near-death experience? Nora appeared in the kitchen doorway, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Her hands moved. "Dad, can we go to the park? You're being weird and I want to swing." Marcus smiled despite himself. 7-year-olds had a gift for cutting through adult anxiety with simple requests. "Yeah, sweetheart. Let's go to the park." They walked the 3 blocks to the neighborhood playground, Nora chattering with her hands about a girl at school who'd learned to sign hello and thank you just to talk to her. Marcus listened, responded, and tried to be present instead of mentally rehearsing testimony or worrying about arbitration hearings. At the park, Nora headed straight for the swings while Marcus settled onto a bench, watching her pump her legs to gain height. Other parents were scattered around, mothers on phones, fathers pushing toddlers on slides, the casual community of people whose lives intersected at playgrounds and school pickup. A woman sat down on the other end of Marcus's bench, a toddler on her lap. "Your daughter is beautiful. How old?" 7? "Mine just turned 2. The terrible 2s are living up to their name." The woman laughed, then paused. "Wait, aren't you the guy from the news? The one who stopped that kidnapping at the Whitmore Grand?" Marcus tensed. He'd known this would happen eventually. The story had been covered extensively in local media, his name mentioned alongside Vivian's, but this was the first time someone had recognized him in public. "Yeah, that was me. Wow, that's incredible. You're like a real-life hero." The woman's expression was admiring, almost starstruck. "What you did, saving that CEO, stopping that man, it's amazing." Marcus didn't feel amazing. He felt exposed, uncomfortable with the attention, unsure how to respond to praise that felt unearned. "I just did what needed to be done." Still, most people wouldn't have. The woman shifted her toddler to her other hip. "My husband works in security. He said what you pulled off was textbook crisis intervention. You should be proud." After the woman left, Marcus sat alone with the weight of hero settling on his shoulders like an ill-fitting coat. He'd been called that before, in the military, after missions that were classified enough that the details stayed buried. He'd never liked it then either. Heroes were people who chose danger for noble reasons. Marcus had just been trying to keep people alive, including himself. Nora ran over, breathless and grinning. "Dad, push me! As high as you can!" Marcus stood, grateful for the distraction, and pushed his daughter on the swing until her laughter filled the air and the conversation about heroism faded into background noise. This was what mattered. Not recognition or titles or public perception, just a father and daughter at a playground, building ordinary moments that would become the foundation of her memories. As the sun began to set, they walked home hand in hand, Nora signing excitedly about wanting pizza for dinner. Marcus agreed, pulling out his phone to order from their usual place. While he waited for the food to arrive, he checked his work email and found a message from Vivian with the subject line, "Foundation Launch Event." The email detailed a gala planned for 3 months out, a formal fundraiser to officially launch the Nora Reed Foundation. Expected attendance was 200 people: donors, corporate partners, community leaders. Marcus and Nora were both invited as guests of honor. Marcus stared at the email, trying to imagine his 7-year-old daughter at a gala, surrounded by wealthy strangers who'd want to meet the girl whose name graced their charitable tax deductions. Trying to imagine himself in a tuxedo, making small talk with people who lived in worlds he'd only ever cleaned. The pizza arrived, providing a temporary escape from the mounting anxiety. Marcus and Nora ate on the couch, watching a nature documentary about ocean life that Nora loved because the closed captions made every fact accessible. Between bites, she signed observations about dolphins and asked questions Marcus had to look up on his phone. After Nora went to bed, Marcus responded to Vivian's email. "We'll be there. Thank you for including us." Then he pulled up the real estate app again and started favoriting houses. Not because he was ready to move yet, but because planning for the future felt like taking control of something when so much else felt chaotic and uncertain. The week leading up to the arbitration hearing passed in a blur of preparation. Marcus reviewed security protocols, studied access logs, and consulted with Tessa about what gaps in the system had allowed Charles Brennan to compromise Vivian's safety. The more he learned, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about one employee's bad choices. It was about systemic vulnerabilities that needed to be addressed. The arbitration took place in a corporate conference room, all neutral colors and uncomfortable chairs. Charles Brennan sat across from Marcus, looking diminished in a way that made Marcus uncomfortable. This wasn't a villain. This was a middle-aged man who'd made terrible choices under pressure, whose career and reputation were now being systematically destroyed. The arbitrator, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, listened to both sides present their cases. Brennan's lawyer argued coercion, producing evidence of Grant Hale's threats against Brennan's family. The Whitmore's legal team argued that regardless of coercion, Brennan had violated the most fundamental trust of his position. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he chose his words carefully. "The security protocols we had in place gave too much access to too few people. Mr. Brennan shouldn't have been able to single-handedly provide the information Grant Hale needed. That's a system failure, not just a personal one." Vivian's lawyer shot him a look that suggested he wasn't helping their case, but the arbitrator seemed interested. "Go on, Mr. Reed." "If we terminate Mr. Brennan without addressing the structural problems that made his actions possible, we're just creating a situation where the next person under pressure will have the same ability to cause harm." Marcus met Brennan's gaze directly. What he did was wrong, but the system that let him do it is also wrong. The arbitrator made notes. "Are you suggesting Mr. Brennan shouldn't face consequences?" "No. I'm suggesting consequences should include fixing the vulnerabilities he exposed. Termination without system reform is just punishment without prevention." After 3 hours of testimony and legal arguments, the arbitrator called for a recess to deliberate. Marcus stepped out into the hallway, loosening his tie and trying to process what he'd just said. Had he just advocated for the man who'd nearly gotten Vivian killed? Or had he just done what his position actually required, thinking beyond individual blame to systemic safety? Vivian found him by the water cooler. That was either very brave or very stupid. I haven't decided which. "I'm sorry if I undermined your case, but everything I said was true." "I know it was. That's what's frustrating." Vivian filled a paper cup with water, drank it, crushed the cup. "You're right that the system failed. I've been so focused on individual accountability that I missed the bigger picture." "So you're not angry?" "I'm angry at the situation, not at you." She paused. "The arbitrator is going to recommend termination with severance. I can feel it. Brennan gets consequences, but not complete destruction. And we get a wake-up call about security infrastructure." Vivian was right. When the arbitrator returned, her ruling was exactly that: termination with a severance package and a mandate for the Whitmore to conduct a comprehensive security audit. Brennan left the room looking relieved and devastated in equal measure, his lawyer guiding him out with a hand on his elbow. Marcus watched them go and felt the complicated weight of justice that didn't feel entirely just. Brennan had made terrible choices, yes, but he'd also been targeted, exploited, forced into an impossible position. The line between victim and perpetrator was so much blurrier than people wanted to acknowledge. That evening, Marcus picked up Nora from after-school care and found her unusually quiet. In the car, she finally signed, "Dad, I need to tell you something." Marcus's stomach clenched. "What's wrong?" "The girl I pushed at school, her mom wants to meet you. She called the school and said she wants to talk about what happened." "Did the school tell you this, or did someone else?" "Mrs. Patterson told me. She said the mom isn't angry, just wants to understand." Nora's hands moved hesitantly. "Am I in more trouble?" "No, sweetheart. This is probably about resolution, not punishment. Sometimes parents want to talk things through so everyone can move forward." But privately, Marcus felt his anxiety spike. Another meeting. Another opportunity for his life to be examined, questioned, judged. He'd become a public figure without choosing it, and now every aspect of his and Nora's life felt exposed to scrutiny. He called the school that evening and spoke with Principal Martinez, who confirmed the other parent wanted a conversation. They scheduled it for the following afternoon, a mediation session with both girls present. The mediation room at Nora's school was designed to be non-threatening: soft chairs, warm colors, children's artwork on the walls. Marcus sat with Nora while the other girl, Emma, sat with her mother, a woman named Linda, who looked nervous and determined in equal measure. The school counselor facilitated. "Thank you all for being here. The goal today is understanding, not blame. Emma, do you want to start by sharing how you felt during the incident?" Emma, a small girl with red hair and freckles, looked at her lap. "I was scared when Nora pushed me, and my knee hurt where I scraped it." The counselor turned to Nora. "And how did you feel when Emma said those things about your hearing and your dad?" Nora's hands moved. She'd insisted on signing even though Emma couldn't understand, with Marcus translating. "I felt angry and sad, like she was saying mean things that weren't true." Linda spoke up, her voice shaking slightly. "Emma told me what she said, and I was horrified. We've had conversations at home about respect and inclusion, but clearly they didn't sink in the way I thought." She looked at Marcus directly. "I'm sorry. What my daughter said about your work, about your finances, that was cruel and inappropriate." Marcus felt some of his defensive tension ease. Kids repeat what they hear. The important thing is they learn from it. "That's generous considering." Linda turned to her daughter. "Emma, what do you want to say to Nora?" Emma's voice came out small. "I'm sorry I said mean things. It was wrong." Nora signed back, Marcus translating. "I'm sorry I pushed you. I should have used words instead of hands." The counselor guided them through a longer conversation about how to handle conflict, about the difference between defending yourself and hurting others, about the complexity of forgiveness. By the end, both girls had agreed to give each other space at school and to talk to adults if future problems arose. As they left, Linda touched Marcus's arm. "Can I say something? What you did at the Whitmore Grand, I read about it in the paper. My husband works in corporate security, and he said what you pulled off was remarkable." She paused. Emma didn't understand what she was saying when she called you just a janitor. "But I want you to know that even if you still were, that wouldn't be something to be ashamed of. Every job has dignity." "Thank you," Marcus said quietly. "That means a lot." Driving home, Nora was thoughtful. Finally, she signed, "Dad, that wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Most scary things aren't once you face them." "Is that why you took the new job? Because you faced the scary thing?" Marcus glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. "Yeah, something like that." "I'm glad you did. Even though it means you wear ties now and they make you look uncomfortable." Marcus laughed. "The ties are definitely the worst part." That weekend, Marcus took Nora to look at houses. He'd narrowed the search down to 3 possibilities, all in the same school district so Nora wouldn't have to change schools, all within his new salary range, all with features that would make their lives tangibly better. The first house had a big backyard but needed too much work. The second had a perfect layout but was on a busy street that made Marcus nervous. The third was a modest 2-story with a fenced yard, a quiet cul-de-sac location, and a bedroom on the first floor that could become Marcus's home office. Nora explored the empty house with wide eyes, her hands moving excitedly. "Dad, this room could be mine! And there's a window seat! Can I have pillows for the window seat?" The real estate agent, a kind woman named Sandra, who'd been patient with Marcus's questions, smiled. There's also a park 3 blocks away with accessible playground equipment, and the neighborhood has a strong sense of community. Marcus stood in what would be the living room and tried to imagine their furniture in this space. Their shabby couch, their secondhand coffee table, their lives expanded into a house that felt impossibly large after years in a cramped apartment. "Can we afford this?" he asked Sandra quietly while Nora explored upstairs. "Based on the salary information you provided, yes. You'd need a mortgage, but you qualify. And the sellers are motivated. They've already moved out of state." Marcus thought about stability, about giving Nora space to grow, about building a life that felt secure instead of constantly precarious. "I'd like to make an offer." The process moved quickly after that. Inspections, negotiations, paperwork that made Marcus's head spin. But within 2 weeks, they had a closing date. In 6 weeks, they'd move into a house that felt like a tangible marker of how completely their lives had changed. The night they signed the purchase agreement, Marcus and Nora celebrated with ice cream. Nora signed between bites. "This is because of the hero thing, right? Because you saved Miss Whitlock?" "Because of the job she offered me after, yes." "So being a hero is good?" Marcus considered how to answer that. The truth was complicated. Being called a hero felt uncomfortable, but the opportunities that came from that label were undeniably good. Being willing to help people when they need it is good. What people call you afterward doesn't matter as much as knowing you did the right thing. Nora processed this with her characteristic seriousness. "I think you would have helped even if there was no new job." "Yeah, I would have." "That's what makes you a real hero, Dad. Not the job. The helping." Marcus pulled his daughter into a hug, feeling the familiar weight of love and responsibility that defined every choice he made. Nora was right, in the simple way children were often right about complex things. The helping mattered more than the recognition. But recognition had power too. And Marcus was slowly learning how to wield that power for good instead of running from it. The trial date loomed closer, and with it, the final test of whether truth and courage would be enough to ensure justice was served. The courthouse steps felt steeper than they should have, each one a reminder that Marcus was walking into a place where his entire character would be dissected for public consumption. He'd worn his best suit, the charcoal one he'd bought specifically for court appearances, and a tie that Nora had helped him choose because she said the blue brought out his eyes. Small comforts, but he'd take what he could get. Vivian met him at the entrance, flanked by Catherine Reeves and a second attorney Marcus hadn't met before. She looked composed in the way people did when they'd spent hours preparing to appear effortless, but Marcus could see tension in the set of her shoulders. "Ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be." They passed through security and made their way to the courtroom where Grant Hale would face justice. The space was smaller than Marcus had imagined, more institutional than dramatic, with wooden benches that looked uncomfortable and fluorescent lighting that made everyone appear slightly ill. Grant sat at the defense table with his legal team, and when he glanced back and saw Marcus, something cold flickered across his face before the mask of composure returned. Ada Torres approached them during a brief recess before proceedings began. "I'm calling you first, Marcus. Walk the jury through what you saw, what you did, and why. Stay calm, answer only what's asked, and don't let the defense attorney rattle you." "What's their angle going to be?" "Exactly what we discussed. That you're a traumatized veteran who saw a threat that wasn't there and escalated the situation. They'll try to make you seem unstable, aggressive, unreliable." Torres's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Do not take the bait. Stay factual. The evidence supports everything you'll say." The judge entered, a severe-looking woman in her 60s who commanded immediate silence. The jury filed in, 12 people who would decide Grant Hale's fate based on the testimony they heard today. Marcus studied their faces and saw ordinary people trying to look attentive, probably wishing they were anywhere else. "The prosecution may call its first witness," the judge announced. "The state calls Marcus Reed." Marcus walked to the witness stand, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The whole truth. Nothing but the truth. The words felt heavier than they should have, weighted with the knowledge that his truth would be challenged, twisted, examined from angles designed to create doubt. Ada Torres began with straightforward questions: his name, his employment at the Whitmore Grand, his daughter, and her deafness. Establishing context, building the foundation for what would come next. Mr. Reed, can you describe what you observed on the morning of the incident? Marcus took a breath and began. He described the lobby, the routine of mopping floors, the way Vivian and Grant had moved together with body language that seemed wrong. He explained how he'd learned ASL for Nora, how he'd recognized Vivian's signs, how he'd understood immediately that she was in danger. What did you do after you understood Ms. Whitlock was in distress? I texted my supervisor in security, alerting them to the situation. Then I moved to a position where I could monitor without being obvious. I didn't want to escalate the threat. Torres walked him through the timeline. The elevator, the executive floor, the coordination with Tessa Ward and police. Marcus kept his answers concise, factual, avoiding embellishment. When they reached the moment he dropped through the ceiling, Torres paused for effect. Why did you choose to intervene at that specific moment? I heard Grant Hale counting to 3. I heard him cock the weapon. Ms. Whitlock's life was in imminent danger, and police were seconds away from breaching. I created a distraction to buy those seconds. Were you trying to be a hero, Mr. Reed? No, I was trying to prevent someone from being murdered. Torres continued for another 20 minutes, covering every detail of the weapon seizure, the arrival of police, the aftermath. When he finally said, "No further questions," Marcus felt a brief moment of relief before Grant's attorney stood. Defense attorney Richard Pemberton was exactly the kind of lawyer Marcus had expected. Expensive suit, practiced charm, eyes that calculated every word. He approached the witness stand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Reed, you testified that you have PTSD from your military service, is that correct? Here it was. The attack Marcus had been dreading. I was diagnosed with PTSD after my second tour. I completed 6 months of therapy and was cleared for civilian work. But PTSD doesn't just go away, does it? It affects perception, judgment, stress responses. It can. With proper treatment, most people manage it successfully. Most people. But you're not most people, are you? You're someone who sees threats everywhere. Someone trained to respond to danger with overwhelming force. Pemberton's tone was casual, conversational, but every word was a calculated strike. Isn't it possible that you misread a business meeting as a kidnapping because your trauma made you hypervigilant? Marcus kept his voice steady. I didn't misread anything. Ms. Whitlock was signing for help. She explicitly stated there was a weapon and she was being forced. But you can't prove she was actually in danger, can you? You never saw the weapon until after you'd assaulted my client and created a chaotic situation that forced police to intervene. I secured a weapon that was being used to threaten someone's life. That's not assault, that's intervention. Pemberton smiled like Marcus had given him exactly what he wanted. Intervention. Interesting word choice. Tell me, Mr. Reed, how many times during your military service did you intervene in situations? How many people did you hurt or kill in the name of security? Ada Torres was on his feet immediately. Objection, Your Honor. The witness's military service is not on trial here. Sustained. Mr. Pemberton, stay focused on the events in question. But the damage was done. The jury had heard the implication that Marcus was someone who hurt people, who used violence as a first resort. Pemberton continued his attack, questioning Marcus's authority to act, suggesting he'd been seeking recognition or reward, insinuating that his relationship with Vivian had developed before the incident rather than because of it. Marcus answered every question with measured calm, refusing to be baited into anger. But by the time Pemberton finally said, "No further questions," Marcus felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. He'd been stripped down, examined, and reassembled as something he wasn't. Unstable, aggressive, self-serving. Vivian was called next, and Marcus watched from the gallery as she testified. She was poised, articulate, unshakable in her account of Grant's threats and coercion. When Pemberton tried to suggest the documents were a legitimate business transaction, Vivian's response was cutting. Mr. Pemberton, I've negotiated hundreds of business deals. None of them involved a gun pressed to my spine while being told I had 3 seconds to sign or be shot. If that's your definition of legitimate business, I'd hate to see what you consider coercion. A few jury members smiled. Pemberton pressed harder, but Vivian didn't break. She corroborated everything Marcus had said, adding details only the victim could provide. The coldness of the weapon against her back, the way Grant's voice had stayed pleasant even while threatening murder, the desperate hope that her signs would reach someone who understood. The prosecution rested after 2 days of testimony. The defense spent the next 3 days trying to build their case. That Grant had been conducting legitimate business, that the weapon was for self-defense, that Marcus's intervention had turned a negotiation into a crisis. But the security footage didn't lie. The forensic evidence supported the prosecution's timeline, and Grant himself made the fatal mistake of testifying. Under cross-examination, Grant's composure cracked. He became defensive, argumentative, and when Torres pressed him about the threats he'd made, Grant's mask slipped entirely. "She was going to sign anyway," Grant snapped. "I was just ensuring she understood the consequences of refusal." And those consequences were? That this could end badly for everyone involved. Torres let the words hang in the air. "So you were threatening her?" "I was negotiating from a position of strength, with a loaded weapon." Grant's lawyer looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. The jury's expressions had shifted from neutral assessment to clear judgment. Whatever sympathy Pemberton had tried to build evaporated in the face of Grant's own words. Closing arguments came on a Friday afternoon. Torres was methodical, walking the jury through the evidence piece by piece, building an unassailable case. Pemberton did his best to create reasonable doubt, but his heart didn't seem in it. The verdict came back after only 4 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Marcus watched Grant's face as the verdict was read. Kidnapping, attempted murder, armed robbery, corporate fraud. Grant didn't flinch, didn't react, just stared straight ahead, as if he could will a different reality into existence. The judge scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks out and dismissed the court. Outside, media had gathered on the courthouse steps. Vivian gave a brief statement about justice being served and her gratitude to everyone who'd helped ensure a safe resolution. Marcus stayed in the background, trying to be invisible again, but reporters spotted him. "Mr. Reed, how does it feel to have saved Ms. Whitlock's life? Do you consider yourself a hero? What's next for you at the Whitmore Grand?" Marcus gave the briefest possible response, that he was glad justice had been served and he was focused on his work improving employee safety, then escaped to his truck. His phone was buzzing with messages. Tessa congratulating him. His former supervisor James saying he'd watched the news coverage. Mrs. Chen asking if he and Nora wanted to come over for dinner to celebrate. And one from Nora's teacher. "Saw the news. Nora is very proud of her dad. She told everyone at lunch that you're a real hero because you help people." Marcus sat in the parking garage and let himself feel the full weight of relief. It was over. Grant would spend decades in prison. The threat was neutralized. He and Vivian could move forward without this hanging over them. His phone rang. Vivian. "You doing okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just processing." "Want to grab coffee? I know a place near the courthouse that's quiet. We could debrief." Marcus almost said no. His instinct was still to retreat, to process alone, to maintain distance. But he caught himself. Vivian wasn't his boss asking for a meeting. She was someone who'd been through trauma with him, who understood what this week had cost, who deserved more than professional courtesy. "Coffee sounds good. Text me the address." They met at a small cafe 3 blocks from the courthouse, the kind of place that served expensive lattes and had mismatched furniture that was supposed to look bohemian. Vivian was already there, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cups in front of her. "I ordered you a black coffee and a backup latte in case you wanted something more interesting today," she said as Marcus slid into the booth across from her. "Black coffee is fine, but I appreciate the option." They sat in silence for a moment, both of them decompressing from the intensity of the trial. Finally, Vivian said, "I keep replaying it in my head, the way Pemberton tried to make you seem unstable, dangerous. It made me furious. It's his job to create doubt. That doesn't make it right." Vivian wrapped her hands around her cup. "You saved my life, Marcus, and they tried to turn that into something ugly, like you were the problem instead of the solution. But the jury saw through it. That's what matters." "Does it bother you the way they questioned your judgment, your trauma, your motives?" Marcus considered the question honestly. "Yeah, it bothers me. But I've learned that you can't control how people perceive you. You can only control your actions and whether you can live with them. I can live with what I did." Vivian studied him with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. "You know what's remarkable about you? You're genuinely humble. Not false modesty, not deflection. You actually don't see yourself as special." "I'm not special. I'm just someone who was in the right place at the right time." "See, that's what I mean. Most people in your position would be leveraging this for maximum benefit. Book deals, speaking tours, consultant positions. You're just focused on doing the work." Marcus took a sip of coffee, uncomfortable with the praise. "I have a daughter who needs stability. Fame doesn't provide that." "No, but security does. And you've built that now. The house closes next week, right?" "Yeah, we move in 2 weeks after that." Nora is beside herself with excitement about having her own room. Vivian smiled, and it was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way her corporate smiles never did. "I'd like to meet her sometime, if that's okay with you. I feel like I know her through you, through the foundation that bears her name. But I'd like to actually meet the girl whose father's love taught him the language that saved my life." The request caught Marcus off guard, but it also felt right. Nora had been the reason he understood Vivian's signs. In a way, she'd been part of the rescue even though she'd been safely at school, unaware of the danger her father was navigating. "I think she'd like that," Marcus said. "She's been asking questions about the lady Dad helped. Wants to know if you're nice." "What did you tell her?" "That you're smart, strong, and fair. That you gave me a job that lets us build a better life. That you're using your resources to help families like ours." Marcus paused. "I also told her that you lost someone you loved, your brother, and that you understand grief." Vivian's eyes grew bright. "Thank you for that. For seeing me as a person, not just a CEO or a victim or a convenient pathway to career advancement. You are a person. A complicated one, but then all interesting people are complicated." They talked for another hour, the conversation ranging from the trial to the foundation to the security overhaul Marcus was designing for all 5 Whitmore properties. By the time they left, the dynamic between them had shifted from boss-employee to something more like genuine friendship, built on shared trauma and mutual respect. The following week was a whirlwind of activity. The house closing went smoothly, and Marcus and Nora spent a weekend moving their modest possessions into a space that felt impossibly large. Nora claimed the bedroom with the window seat immediately, and Marcus set up his home office in the first-floor bedroom, filling the shelves with the safety manuals and training materials that had become his new normal. On Saturday afternoon, Vivian came to visit, bringing a housewarming gift, a framed photograph of the Whitmore Grand's lobby at sunset, professionally shot and mounted with an inscription on the back, where invisibility became impossible, with gratitude, VW. Nora greeted Vivian at the door, suddenly shy despite her earlier enthusiasm. But Vivian crouched down to Nora's level and signed, "Hello. It's nice to finally meet you." Nora's face lit up. "You know sign language." "I learned for my brother, like your dad learned for you." That broke the ice. Nora dragged Vivian on a tour of the house, signing excitedly about her room, the backyard where she'd have a dog someday, the park 3 blocks away. Marcus followed, watching his daughter interact with the woman whose near death had changed their lives completely. After the tour, they sat in the backyard while Nora explored the fence line, checking for weak spots where a future dog might escape. Vivian watched her with a soft expression. "She's wonderful, Marcus. You've done an incredible job raising her. I'm just trying not to mess her up too badly." "I think you're succeeding." Vivian paused. "I wanted to tell you, the foundation launch is in 2 weeks. We've raised over $2 million already, and the event should bring in at least another $1 million. That's enough to fund therapy and support services for over 500 families in the first year." The numbers were staggering. Marcus thought about all the parents like him, struggling to afford the care their children needed, choosing between rent and speech therapy, between groceries and hearing aids. 500 families would have those choices made easier. "That's incredible," he said quietly. "It's because of you and Nora. Your story resonated with people. It made the cause real instead of abstract." Vivian turned to look at him directly. "The board voted unanimously to name you as executive director of the foundation's grant review committee. You'd evaluate applications and make funding decisions. It's a volunteer position, but it would give you direct influence over who gets help. Marcus processed this. More responsibility, more visibility, but also more opportunity to make sure the families who needed help most actually received it. What about my work at the Whitmore? This would be separate, maybe 10 hours a month. Board meetings, application reviews. We'd work around your schedule. Vivian smiled. I'm not asking you to choose between jobs. I'm asking you to expand your impact. Then yes, I'll do it. Nora ran over, signing urgently. Dad, there's a loose board in the fence. We need to fix it before we get a dog, or the dog will escape and get lost, and I'll be sad forever. Marcus stood, grateful for the excuse to focus on something concrete and fixable. Let's go look at it together. Ms. Whitlock, do you want to help? I'd love to. The three of them spent the next hour examining the fence, with Nora directing operations while Marcus and Vivian actually did the work. It was ordinary, domestic, nothing like the high-stakes drama that had brought them together. But that ordinariness felt like its own kind of victory, proof that life could be normal again, that trauma didn't have to define everything that came after. As Vivian was leaving, she hugged Marcus at the door. Thank you for today, for letting me be part of this, for reminding me what actually matters. Thank you for seeing us, for making sure our lives got better instead of just going back to how they were. We saved each other, Marcus. Don't forget that. After she left, Nora signed to Marcus, I like her. She's nice, and she knows how to use a hammer. Those are good qualities in a person. Is she your friend now, like a real friend, not a boss friend? Marcus considered the question. A month ago, the idea of being friends with a billionaire CEO would have seemed absurd, but shared trauma had a way of creating bonds that transcended typical social boundaries. Yeah, sweetheart, I think she is. The foundation launch gala arrived on a perfect spring evening, the kind where the air smelled like flowers, and the sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Marcus wore a tuxedo he'd rented, feeling simultaneously sophisticated and ridiculous. Nora wore a blue dress that matched her eyes, her hair pulled back in a style that made her look older than 7. The venue was the Whitmore Grand's ballroom, transformed into something magical with lights and flowers and tables dressed in white linens. 200 guests mingled, the kind of wealthy, influential people Marcus had spent years being invisible to. Now they wanted to meet him, to shake his hand, to congratulate him on his bravery, and thank him for inspiring the foundation. Nora stayed close to his side, overwhelmed by the attention, but also thriving on it in the way children did when they were the center of benevolent focus. People asked her questions about school, about her favorite subjects, about what it meant to have a foundation named after her. She answered in her clear, proud way, using her voice and her hands together, refusing to hide any part of herself. Vivian gave a speech about the foundation's mission, about the families it would serve, about the power of one person's courage to create ripple effects of change. She told the story of the kidnapping, of Marcus's intervention, of how his love for his daughter had equipped him with exactly the skill needed to understand a desperate call for help. Marcus Reed didn't see himself as a hero, Vivian said, her voice carrying across the ballroom. He saw himself as a maintenance worker, a single father, someone trying to build a stable life for his child. But when courage was needed, he provided it. When understanding was needed, he offered it. And when change was possible, he embraced it. The Nora Reed Foundation exists because one man chose to see another person's humanity and act on it. That's the kind of heroism that changes the world. The applause was thunderous. Marcus felt his face heat with embarrassment, but Nora grabbed his hand and squeezed, her proud smile saying everything about how she felt about her father being publicly recognized. Later during the dinner service, a woman approached their table. She was in her 30s, professional-looking, with a young boy who wore hearing aids and was signing with her. Mr. Reed, I'm Sarah Chen. My son Daniel is deaf, and we've been struggling to afford the therapy he needs. When I heard about the foundation, I applied for a grant. We just found out today that we were approved. Her eyes were bright with tears. You don't know what this means to our family. Daniel can get the speech therapy that will help him thrive. We can afford the specialized education programs. You've given us hope. Marcus didn't know what to say. He looked at Daniel, at the boy's eager face and bright eyes, and saw Nora reflected there, a child navigating a world not built for them, deserving every opportunity to succeed. I'm glad we could help, Marcus said finally. Every kid deserves the chance to reach their potential. Sarah hugged him, thanked him again, then moved on to speak with Vivian. Marcus watched her go and felt the full weight of what they'd built. This wasn't abstract anymore. This was real families, real children, real lives changed for the better. Nora signed to him, "Dad, that made you cry. Happy tears, sweetheart, because we helped. Because you were brave. Because I was in the right place at the right time." No. Nora's signs were firm, insistent. Because you chose to help even when it was scary. That's what brave means. Marcus pulled his daughter close, grateful beyond words for her clarity, her wisdom, her ability to see through his deflections to the truth underneath. She was right. Bravery wasn't about not being scared. It was about choosing to act despite the fear. The evening continued with dancing, networking, and more stories from families who'd benefited or hoped to benefit from the foundation. By the time the event wound down, Marcus was exhausted but fulfilled in a way he'd never experienced in his maintenance work. This mattered. This made a difference. This was work worth doing. As guests departed, Vivian found Marcus and Nora near the ballroom entrance. "Thank you both for being here tonight. You made this real for everyone." "Thank you for creating it," Marcus replied, "for turning one bad day into something that helps thousands of people." "We turned it into something good. Together." Vivian knelt down to Nora's level. "Nora, your dad is one of the best people I've ever met. I hope you know how lucky you are to have him." Nora signed back. "I know. But he's lucky to have me too." Vivian laughed. "You're absolutely right, he is." Driving home that night, Nora fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the excitement and attention. Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his daughter, safe and loved and proud of her father. Everything he'd done, every choice he'd made, had been to protect that peace, to ensure she grew up secure and confident. But he'd learned something important in the past 2 months. Protection didn't always mean hiding. Sometimes it meant stepping forward, taking risks, trusting that courage could build something better than safety ever could. Sometimes being a good father meant modeling bravery instead of just providing stability. The house was dark when they arrived. Marcus carried Nora inside, tucked her into bed, still in her fancy dress because she was too deeply asleep to wake for pajamas. He stood in her doorway for a moment, watching her breathe, grateful for every ordinary moment that made up their extraordinary life. In his home office, Marcus pulled up the email he'd been drafting for the past week. It was a comprehensive proposal for employee safety protocols across all 5 Whitmore properties: silent alert systems, threat recognition training, compartmentalized security access, behavioral monitoring for signs of coercion. 60 pages of research, recommendations, and implementation timelines. He attached it to an email to Vivian and the executive team, wrote a brief cover message, and hit send. The work continued. The mission persisted, and Marcus was ready for whatever came next. 3 months later, Marcus stood in the Whitmore Grand's lobby during a morning shift change, watching his safety protocols in action. Employees wore new badges with embedded panic buttons. Security monitors displayed real-time tracking of personnel in sensitive areas. Training sessions on threat recognition had become mandatory for all staff, from executive level down to maintenance. The lobby looked the same as it had that morning when he'd mopped floors and noticed Vivian's distress. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, money in the air. But the systems underneath had changed fundamentally. People were safer now, protected in ways they didn't even realize. Tessa Ward approached, tablet in hand. "Morning, Marcus. I've got the incident reports from all 5 properties. Across the board, employee confidence in safety measures is up 73%. We've had 4 silent alerts triggered, 3 false alarms, 1 legitimate threat that was neutralized before escalating." The legitimate one? Boston property. Guest became aggressive with a front desk agent. Agent hit the panic button. Security responded in under 90 seconds. Situation resolved without injury. Tessa smiled. "Your system works." Marcus felt satisfaction settle in his chest. This was the kind of success that mattered, not glory or recognition, but quiet effectiveness. People going home safe at the end of their shifts, threats identified and neutralized before they became crises. His phone buzzed. A text from Nora's school. "Early dismissal today due to teacher training. Can you pick up at 1 p.m.? Marcus responded immediately. "I'll be there." Then he texted Vivian, taking off at 12:30 for Nora's early pickup. We'll be back online tonight to review the Chicago property proposal. Vivian's response came quickly. Family first, always. The proposal can wait. Marcus packed up his office, said goodbye to Tessa, and drove to Nora's school. She bounded out of the building when he arrived, her backpack bouncing, her hands already moving with the story of her day. They stopped for ice cream on the way home, a Tuesday tradition they'd started after moving into the house, and Nora told him about a project she was working on for school. It's about heroes, she signed between bites of chocolate chip cookie dough. We have to interview someone we think is a hero and present about them. I'm doing you. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Sweetheart, I'm not. Yes, you are. You saved Ms. Whitlock. You helped make the foundation that helps kids like me. You fixed the fence so we could get Luna. She gestured to the car where their new rescue dog, a gentle golden retriever mix, waited patiently. That's hero stuff, Dad. What questions do you have to ask? What makes you brave? What's the scariest thing you've ever done? If you could tell other people one thing about being a hero, what would it be? Marcus thought about how to answer those questions in ways a 7-year-old could understand and present to her class. Brave is choosing to help even when you're scared. The scariest thing I've ever done was becoming a father, because I knew your whole life would depend on my choices. And if I could tell people one thing about being a hero, it's that you don't have to be special. You just have to pay attention and care about other people. Nora wrote down his answers with the careful precision of someone who took schoolwork seriously. Mrs. Patterson said we can bring our hero to class if they can come. Can you come on Friday? Absolutely. What time? 2 o'clock. And you have to wear your fancy clothes because it's a special presentation. Friday afternoon found Marcus back in a suit, sitting in a tiny chair in Nora's second-grade classroom while she stood at the front and presented her project. She'd made a poster with photos of him, some from the news coverage of the trial, some from the foundation gala, some just from their everyday life. The title read, My Hero Dad, in carefully formed letters. Nora used her voice and her hands to tell her classmates about the day Marcus had saved Vivian, about the foundation that now helped families, about the ways her father made her feel safe and loved. She was articulate, confident, proud of her dad in a way that made Marcus's chest ache with gratitude. When she finished, her teacher asked if Marcus wanted to say anything. He stood, looking at the 23 second graders watching him with various levels of attention. The most important thing I want you all to know is that heroes aren't special people. They're ordinary people who choose to help when help is needed. Every single one of you can be a hero by paying attention to the people around you and caring when they're in trouble. You don't need superpowers or special training. You just need to notice when something's wrong and have the courage to do something about it. One boy raised his hand. But weren't you scared when the bad man had the gun? Terrified, Marcus admitted. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even though you're scared. After the presentation, parents filtered in for pickup, and several approached Marcus to shake his hand or thank him for his example. One mother said her daughter had been inspired by Nora's story to learn sign language so she could communicate with a deaf student at their community center. Small ripples of change spreading outward from one moment of courage. Driving home, Nora was jubilant. Mrs. Patterson said my presentation was the best one. And Emma, the girl I pushed, she said she wants to learn sign language too because it's cool. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Dad, do you think you'll save anyone else? Like, is that your job now? Marcus considered how to answer. My job is to make sure other people can be safe without needing last-minute rescues. I'm trying to build systems so what happened to Ms. Whitlock doesn't happen to anyone else. That's still hero stuff, just different kind. Maybe. But the everyday kind of heroism, being there for the people who need you, doing work that matters, making the world a little better, that's more important than dramatic rescues. You do both, though. That's why you're my hero. That evening, after Nora was in bed and Luna was settled in her crate, Marcus sat on the back porch of their house and let himself feel the full scope of how completely his life had transformed. 6 months ago, he'd been invisible, content with obscurity, focused entirely on providing stability for his daughter. Now he was a director, a foundation board member, someone whose testimony had helped put a dangerous man in prison, someone whose story inspired second graders and fundraising galas. The visibility still felt uncomfortable sometimes, like wearing someone else's clothes, but it also felt necessary, important, like he'd been given a platform and a responsibility to use it well. His phone rang. Vivian. "I hope I'm not calling too late," she said. "No, Nora's asleep. What's up?" "I just wanted to tell you that the Chicago property implemented your protocols today. All 5 locations are now operating under the new safety systems. We did it, Marcus. We made every single Whitmore employee safer." Pride settled warm in Marcus's chest. "That's incredible. Thank you for trusting me with this." "Thank you for being someone I could trust." Vivian paused. "I've been thinking about something, about how that day in the conference room changed both of our lives. You saved mine, obviously, but I think I might have saved yours too, in a different way." "How so?" "You were hiding, Marcus. Building a good life, yes, but hiding nonetheless. I gave you a reason to stop hiding, to step into your full potential instead of staying small for safety's sake." Marcus thought about that. She was right. He'd been hiding, making himself invisible, choosing safety over growth. The crisis with Grant had forced him into visibility, but Vivian's response, the job offer, the foundation, the trust, had given him a reason to embrace that visibility instead of retreating back into obscurity. "You're right," he said. "We did save each other, just in different ways. I'm grateful for all of it. The scary parts, the hard parts, the parts that changed everything, because where we are now, this is better, for both of us." After they hung up, Marcus stayed on the porch a while longer, listening to the quiet sounds of his neighborhood settling into night. Luna whined softly from inside, dreaming dog dreams. Nora was safe in her room with the window seat and the glow in the dark stars on her ceiling. Their lives had expanded into this house, this community, this future that felt full of possibility instead of just survival. Marcus had learned that heroism wasn't a single moment of courage. It was a series of choices to keep showing up, keep helping, keep caring, even when it was difficult or scary or uncertain. It was Nora choosing to befriend the girl who'd bullied her. It was Vivian building a foundation instead of just moving on from trauma. It was ordinary people deciding that making the world better mattered more than staying safe and comfortable. 6 months ago, Marcus had been invisible. Now he was seen. And he discovered that being seen, really seen, for who he actually was and what he could contribute, was worth the discomfort of visibility. The janitor who'd mopped floors in obscurity was gone. In his place was a director, a father, a hero to a 7-year-old girl who knew that bravery was choosing to help even when you were scared. Marcus stood, stretched, and went inside to check on Nora one more time before bed. She was sleeping peacefully, Luna curled at the foot of her bed despite the no dogs on furniture rule they'd established. Marcus let it slide. Some rules were worth breaking for the sake of comfort and love. He turned off the light and closed Nora's door most of the way, leaving it open just enough to hear if she needed him in the night. Then he went to his own room in the house they now owned, in the life they'd built from the ashes of trauma and the seeds of courage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments to choose between hiding and helping. But tonight, Marcus Reed, former invisible maintenance worker, current director of employee safety and wellness, always and forever Nora's dad, rested in the knowledge that he'd made the right choices. That courage had built something better than safety ever could. That being seen was worth the risk of visibility, and that sometimes the people you save end up saving you right back.